Mr. Edwards, still think this is maintenance?
Oh, Miss Burnwood, what have you done? Changing horses midstream? Truly unprofessional.
You know what we want.
Where is the carrot?
No carrot. You're useless to the partners. Compromised. Even if we let you live, you can never return. Why die protecting them?
When I can drag them down with me.
It's a bad hand, but it's all you've got.
Three families. That's all it took. The Ingrams, the Carlyles, the Stuyvesants. 3 dynasties secretly pooling their resources over generations, creating a singularity so dense that nothing escapes its gravity.
Never heard of them.
Well, they've heard of you. In fact, you just became the top of their agenda.
Go. We can't give them time to retaliate.
Don't take your eyes off him.
Be careful.
Well, here we are again. 3 families. That's all it took. The Ingrams, the Carlyles, the Stuyvesants.
Tell us everything about them.
The ivory towers are about to fall.
And when we're done...
Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, the partners are all that matter.
There's an issue.
Of course there is.
Olivia's tracked the names mentioned by the Constant, and they're dead ends.
How dead?
Obituaries for all 3 have appeared online. Accidental death, heart failure, lung cancer.
They're covering their tracks. Faster than I thought.
A contingency plan of sorts. The Constant wasn't aware of it.
Well, it seems they didn't tell him everything after all.
Something this big will leave traces behind.
The Constant says to follow the money.
Milton Fitzpatrick. The investment bank. It's a key Providence asset.
Which you worked for.
The director of the New York branch is a Providence operative. It's our best bet as a way in.
I'll tell the pilot to turn the plane around.
Right, gentlemen. Here's what we've come up with. The partners are transitioning between identities, but everything is so recent, the Milton Fitzpatrick bank records will still be intact. We've confirmed that the partners have active accounts there. However, the bank's records are remotely updated on a frequent basis. We may only have hours before any leads that could get us the new identities of the partners are gone forever. The data we need can be obtained in 2 ways. The bank's data core can be accessed through the basement vault, but getting inside the vault could be challenging. Alternatively, Bank Director Athena Savalas, Head of Security Mateo Perez, and Head of Accounts Fabian Mann each carry a partial backup drive with the data. We'll need all 3 drives to get the full data. Now, we cannot risk the partners discovering the data breach. Eliminating the bank's director, Athena Savalas, would sever the last remaining Providence tie to the bank and keep our activities hidden.
Okay, one more time.
Welcome to New York, 47. The Milton Fitzpatrick Bank is open for business, but it seems there's some sort of investigation underway. Expect increased security. Your target, Director Athena Savalas, can be found in her top-floor office, overlooking the iconic Teller Hall. Head of Security, Mateo Perez, is roaming between the vault area and the Teller Hall, talking to employees. And Head of Accounts, Fabian Mann, can be found on the investment banker floor and the top floor of the bank, driving the internal investigation. Remember, we need to secure the data from the bank's reinforced vault, or, alternatively, acquire 3 hard drives carried by the director and her 2 lieutenants, Mann and Perez. Good luck, 47.
I'd like a private meeting, please.
Oh, I've already seen him. Are you a client?
I'm looking to become a customer. I have a substantial private savings I'd like to deposit with your bank.
Wonderful. How substantial?
7 figures.
7. I see. Excellent. I don't know what they're working on. Yes, let's just find a nice private area. Break one of the cameras and he'll come running. I didn't catch your name, Mr.
Reaper.
So, what do you do for a living?
I'm in the retirement industry.
Ah, then we're in a very similar business. Have these past few years been as profitable for you as they have for us?
Very.
Excellent. Director Savalas has taken us to record profits. All it took was a creative approach to the elimination of, let's say, unwanted elements.
I'm all for elimination.
Let me just activate the booth privacy setting for one moment. This way nobody can see or hear anything that goes on in here.
Practical.
Isn't it? So, you wanted to open a savings account, Mr. Reaper?
Yes.
Smart move. People have started filling their mattresses with cash, blaming the banks for the host of financial woes in the world, but let me be blunt. These people are the reason the world is slipping.
Really?
I say we stop taxing the wealthy and allow them to put the money back into society rather than into the state coffers. Watch how that creates jobs for everyone. If people don't put...
In our emails, and earlier we brought up that we haven't really done a broad overview of the puppet master families, their political groups, secret societies, and think tanks. I think a lot of people recognize the names of these families and organizations, but they don't really know much else. And I know a lot of the crossover gets hazy for me. I think the one thing I love about Battle Hymn is that you say it wasn't written for the believer, it's written to be a wake-up call for those who haven't explored this type of material. And that's what I'd like to do with the show, in a sense, provide a nice informational chunk of audio that someone can share with friends or family who might not take this situation seriously. So let's take the trip. Let's start out with probably the most infamous family of all, the Rockerfellers. What'd you find out about them?
Yeah, sure. The Rockerfellers. I started out the book with them because they are so active and have been for generations in creating a sort of one world government. That's what they've been after. It all starts with John D. Rockefeller. Everybody, I think, is familiar with him.
Mm-hmm.
In 1863, he built his first refinery, and 7 years later, he incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio. He hated competition and loved monopoly, so he formed his first monopoly in this business through the National City Bank of Cleveland, which was owned by the Rothschilds, according to a congressional hearing. The Rothschilds we will have to hear about more later because obviously it's a foreign family, a banking family that has been for decades trying to insinuate itself into the American fabric. By 1880, John D. owned or controlled 95% of the oil produced in the United States. And, that's mind-boggling right there because it's basically 17 years. He maintained this monopoly despite attempts of Congress, the Ohio Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court to break up Standard Oil. He eventually passed along control to his son, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., in 1922, and it was Jr. who got the corporation involved in philanthropic organizations, basically to ease the public's impression of the firm. The Rockefeller Foundation, for instance, chaired by John Rockefeller III, donated huge sums to various charities and causes, particularly the Population Council and other entities promoting eugenics, which was a Rockefeller family interest for the previous 3 generations. Now, Rockefeller's famous descendants, among the most famous, of course, was Nelson Rockefeller, because he almost became our president.
Right.
He began government work in Latin America affairs, which was an intelligence position during the FDR administration, intending to monopolize raw materials in Latin America for the U.S. While excluding the Europeans. By the end of World War II, Nelson dealt with Germans living in South America, which was a potential embarrassment. And David Ben-Gurion took advantage of this. Essentially, the Israeli faction blackmailed Nelson Rockefeller into using his tremendous influence with the Latin nations to line up their votes in favor of creating the Israeli state by the UN resolution. This was revealed by John Loftus and Mark Ahrens in their book called The Secret War Against the Jews, and they had eyewitnesses and CIA documentation to back this up. So anyway, back to Nelson. He served 4 terms as a New York governor, but failed 3 times to be nominated for the presidency. He made vice president in 1974 when Gerald Ford replaced Nixon. In 1979, of course, Nelson died of an apparent heart attack while he was having sex with a female staffer named Megan Marshak, who, in his will, received $50,000 on the deed to a New York townhouse.
Convenient.
Yeah. The most influential of the Rockefellers is David, who just won't go away. He's well into his 90s now and still exercising an incredible amount of influence on policy and our government right up to the top levels. David attended the London School of Economics, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and was heavily influenced there by Harold Lasky of Britain's Socialist Party. David worked for the OSS in North Africa during the war, and this explains his intelligence ties today, and they are strong, believe me. He became a board chairman and CEO of Chase Manhattan Corporation, and he joined the Council on Foreign Relations, which we call the CFR now, as early as 1941. And 30 years later, he formed the Trilateral Commission with generous donations from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which had a refocused one world strategy. That's something that they wrote in their own report. David wrote in his memoir, and I'm quoting this, quote, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to bring more integrated a global political and economic structure, one world, if you will." And then he closes by saying, "If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it."
Yeah, that is a very telling quote. It's one of the best out there, but your book is full of great quotes, which I think makes it awesome for someone who's a bit of a skeptic who might be reading through, and they can see these people themselves, making the case that they're part of this conspiracy. I did want to revisit, if we could, Nelson Rockefeller's dealings with Nazis in South America, because it's a story of essentially how Israel became a country, which is a huge source of conflict and problems even today.
Yeah. Well, there were a tremendous number of Nazis who escaped to South America, of course, and Nelson was, dealing with them. This is immediately, actually during the war as well as immediately afterward. So this is obviously an embarrassment. And Ben-Gurion and the Israeli faction used this against Nelson to basically blackmail him. And as I said, this is supported by eyewitnesses who were there, as well as CIA documents that have been released.
Yeah, it's so crazy because they basically said, this is what we want. We want, a nation state right here on this sacred area in the Middle East, and they got it. And I've always thought it was a bit weird why America is in such lockstep with that whole thing. And you point out in the book that it's just because that information could still come out today.
Well, yeah. I don't think it's as powerful as a sort of Damocles over our heads as it was back then. Because,
True.
A lot of Americans they already know that Operation Paperclip took place, and there was more to it than just, taking rocket scientists. They were taking Nazi doctors who, committed the most outrageous and heinous acts in their experiments. They took everybody they could find. They took people who were developing sarin gas and other nerve agents.
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of known now, but back then, it was explosive, and basically they just confronted Rockefeller with this stuff and said, "Hey, play ball with us. We want the South American nations voting for an Israeli state, or else we're going to release this.
Yeah, it's so crazy that Nelson had the power to just be like, all right, get off my back with this stuff. And it's such a huge thing to be able to deliver votes for that. But let's get into, of course, the other historic family, the Rothschilds. How did they get so powerful?
Well, yeah, it all starts with Meyer Amschel Bauer, who was born in Frankfurt way back in 1744. He apprenticed at a banking house and finally somehow became court financier to William IX of Hesse-Kassel. William IX was a Mason, and to ingratiate himself with his employer, Meyer became a Mason himself. And this set the family pattern of doing business with reigning houses of Europe. Now, the family fortune began when William of Hesse received a lot of money from England during the American Revolution to supply his Hessian troops. He gave this money that he received from England to Meyer to be invested, but Meyer instead gave it to his son Nathan to establish himself as head of the family business in London. He eventually repaid William, but only after Nathan had been set up. Now, according to Nathan Rothschild, he increased the 20,000 pounds that his dad gave him to 50 million pounds in just a few years.
Wow.
And by 1815, Nathan was the principal financier of the British government and the Bank of England. Later, the Rothschilds took control of the Bank of England. You're probably familiar with the Waterloo story that you read in the book.
Right.
Would you want me to go into that?
Sure.
It's a bit involved. Well, yeah, what happened was Nathan had agents. First of all, he gave money to both Napoleon and to the British Army. And he had agents there on the front with both people. And so when Wellington defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, the final defeat, Nathan had the information a day before everybody else, and he play-acted like...
Might be a little warm in here, but those exhaust fumes are just horrible.
I know. Who the hell decides to put an AC unit in a basement garage?
Someone who doesn't work here anymore, I hope.
My dad came by the bank last week. Lives out of town, but drove in to see where I work.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I gave him a tour and everything. Afterward, we went to this little diner over on 5th.
Hey, what are you? Some kind of thief? You can't be here. What the hell is this? Give it up! Drop
there, buddy.
The club!
Yeah,
I
do
repeat,
it.
target is fist fighting. Watch your fire.
Don't let him take it.
He was disappointed, and all the investors, with a sharp eye on Nathan, sold. Mm-hmm. And Nathan bought things at pennies on the dollar. So when the truth came out, the other investors were snookered, and Nathan had basically a controlling interest in the Bank of England.
Yeah, that seems to be the Rothschild strategy all along. Obviously it's more complicated than buy low, sell high, but it seems like they've just been notorious for manipulating the way investors feel and the way investors act, and then capitalizing when the market is low. It's kind of crazy, but I think a big problem skeptics have with these families is that John D. Rockefeller was building his oil empire in 1860, and Mayer Rothschild rose to wealth and power in the 1800s as well. It seems hard to believe that almost 200 years later, we're still stuck under the control of just a few families. But how have they progressed through the years? How have they maintained this power?
Well, yeah, it's, they've been, this is part of a plan, and it's generational. The Rothschilds go back to the 18th century. And, they had a very clear agenda, which is to keep getting more and more power and more control over the royal houses and other governments of the world. And they have succeeded tremendously. You know, around 1804, Meyer changed the family name from Bauer to Rothschild, which means Red Shield. It was taken from the emblem on the homes of his ancestors. This was due probably because of the reigning anti-Semitism in Europe at the time. Meyer's other sons, aside from Nathan, established themselves in banking sectors of Paris, Vienna, and Naples, and the family's power and riches grew until they could receive titles of nobility from the indebted royal families. You know, you have to understand something. The whole point of a bank is to create debt.
Right.
And when you're dealing with royal houses and governments, I mean, you've got the most powerful institutions in the entire world indebted to you.
Right.
So you get to call the tune many times. Now, the Rothschilds have always seen America as a plum that they wanted. They financed the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Harrimans, in their railroad and steel businesses. In addition to the Morgans, they were really tied close to the Morgans, by the way. The Morgans were almost like employees, as powerful as A.P. Morgan was. It was almost a Rothschild employee. So in 1837, the Rothschilds sent August Schoenberg to the United States as their agent. Schoenberg changed his name to August Belmont and started buying U.S. government bonds with no apparent source of capital. Belmont made generous contributions to the Democratic Party, which led to his appointment as U.S. representative to The Hague between 1853 and 1857. He married Commodore Perry's daughter, Matthew Perry's daughter, which cemented his social standing, and he became president of the Jockey Club as a reward for bringing thoroughbred racing to America. Belmont Park in New York still bears his name. But in any case, he was definitely a Rothschild agent, making moves for them here in the United States.
Man, do you think there's a certain amount of luck involved with acquiring this much power and influence?
No, I think it was a plan set down in the very beginning. If you read the epilogue of the book, you'll see there are, I think, 25 instructions on how to gain and cement power over governments.
Right. I mean, but they've kind of gotten lucky in that they've never really gotten exposed or completely taken out. I mean, considering the group is so small, if someone really found this information out early enough, you feel like a handful of bullets could put a stop to most of it.
Well, one of the instructions in the 25 that I mentioned was to control the press, and
right.
They do. The press, as I mentioned in the book, is controlled in the Western world by just 6 corporations. Here in America, it's just 5. The 6th corporation is the German corporation that controls most of, in fact, nearly all of the major publishing houses here in the United States and overseas. But, all of the mainstream media is controlled by 5 corporations here in the United States.
Right. I think people are definitely wise to that. At least they should be by now. That whole section of what we're talking about is completely off the table. The biggest problem we have. I mean, I've got friends who are economic majors and they don't study this. It's out of the schools as well. Let's talk a little bit about how they have manipulated education in this country.
Oh, education? Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, you've got they're doing it through the federal government. You have to understand that these people have a tremendous amount of control over the policies of this government through organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Literally hundreds of these members are in the upper administration as appointees in every single administration going back to the 1920s. So anyway, the purpose of education today is not to educate, but to indoctrinate children into collectivism, doing away with national sovereignty. That's the goal. And, they're teaching dependence upon the state and not the family, and they seek to destroy belief in God. You can see this over and over again, basically just taking all reference to God and religion out of the curriculum here. The National Education Association, the NEA, creates most of America's educational programs today. This NEA was created by John D. Rockefeller, who once said, quote, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers."
Mm-hmm.
And the real purpose of the Goals 2000 Educate America Act, which was passed during the Clinton presidency in 1994, is simply to legalize federal jurisdiction over curriculum. So we have, the continuing pattern of centralization, and I think most people have noticed that right now. Administration after administration, including this one, keeps moving towards centralizing while stepping all over the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and states' rights.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about something. I mean, if you look into the most basic of conspiracy information, you're going to come across Bohemian Grove with the iconic image of the giant owl statue. But can you tell us a bit about the Bohemian Grove Club? It started in, 1872?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to point out that I didn't find the Bohemian Grove that evil. It's more like, I don't know, it's like a silly collection of, old guys acting like frat guys. My former boss, Merv Griffin, was a member of the Bohemian Grove and stuff like that. So it's, they go through, they have, a ceremony that includes the owl and everything.
Having a war scene, and it has some things with the weapons. So I said, gosh, this has got some weapons in it that clearly validates the archaeology that they found. And then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way, or had totem poles or that kind of stuff. But this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, two of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. Mm. And I'm like, sir, I don't want to be disrespectful of your training and archaeological understanding and history, but I don't know of any native tribe that did what I'm seeing here, unless it was an act of war. And this is really, really unusual. And I've seen this type of scene with artifacts over in the Middle East. And I've seen weapons like this over in the Middle East. I said, are you sure this is Native Americans and not some kind of colony that came from over there? And he was convinced they were native, and I said, well, I'd like to show you some things on a few websites that identify artifacts in the Middle East countries, and especially Egypt and Israel and Syria and Jordan area, and some of those spots where there's some of these ancient groups. And I said, this type of altar, this type of religious ceremony, and some of these weapons, I've seen them before over there. Well, he was quite interested in that because he loves Native American history, but he's starting to question, maybe I need to dig into this more. That was his comment. So I said, at that point, then I thought, I believe this is why I'm here. I needed to see this and hear about this. At this point, I'm not that concerned about the financial stuff anymore. I'm wanting to know, where is this altar? And so I asked him, I said, can you take me to this altar? I often pray over these things, and it's very beneficial for the land and for the country and for the people. Can I go to this altar and see it? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? He said, well, Rockefeller was. So, nice. I just, like, okay, can we go there? And he said, yeah, it's just a short walk. Come on. And we've actually, had already walked by their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar. And he said, well, Rockefeller lives. It's very beneficial for the land and for the country and for the people. Can I go to this altar and see it? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? And he said, well, Rockefeller lives. See it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? And he said, well, Rockefeller lives.
Following is an excerpt from Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge by Tracy R. Twyman, available from Quintessential Publications. Now, there were a few examples of predecessors, but really, historians consider the origin of coin money to be around 3000 BC in the temples of Ishtar in ancient Mesopotamia. It was created for use in a public religious rite known as, quote, sacred prostitution. The priestesses of the fertility goddess served her by offering themselves as representatives of her to male worshippers. It was thought that if the men simulated intercourse with the goddess, this would stimulate fertility in the land. A very important part of the ritual was the donation that occurred beforehand. The worshipper was expected to make offerings to the goddess in the form of wheat. This was fitting, since wheat was the main agricultural product that they were asking the goddess to stimulate the production of. During religious festivals, worshippers would bring a portion of their yearly wheat crop to the temple. After being symbolically offered to the patron god or gods, the offerings were used to feed all of the priests, priestesses, and temple support staff. In exchange for their sacrifices, the men received 1 coin for each bushel of wheat, and each coin would entitle them to a visit with one of the priestesses. This is how the coin got its name. Shekel means bushel of wheat. The coin featured a sheaf of wheat on one side and a depiction of Ishtar on the other. This identification of money with wheat continues to the present day, where words that translate as bread all over the world are used as slang terms for money. This is exactly how and why coin money was produced by the ancient Greeks as well. Beginning in 1000 BC, the Greeks minted coins as tokens given to the worshippers of Dionysus in exchange for the donation of a bull to the Dionysian temple. These bulls would all be sacrificed at the annual celebration known as, quote, the sacred feast, to which Dionysus himself was invited. Half of the meat would be burned in honor of the god, while the rest was shared by the congregants, all those who could furnish a coin as proof of their donation. When the large-scale minting of coins in Rome began in 269 BC, this too had a connection with the divine. The new silver coin, called the denarius, was minted in the temple of Juno Mineta. Juno was the wife of Jupiter. Mineta means to warn. This appellation of Juno's stems from an incident in which the sacred geese at her temple allegedly warned the Romans of an impending attack from the Gauls. The Romans saw Juno as the protectress of the state. The issuance of money was one of the activities in Rome that she was thought to preside over. It is from Juno's title of moneta that the English words money, monetary, and mint are derived. The preceding was an excerpt from Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge by me, Tracy R. Twyman, available exclusively from...
This is Gerald Posner. This is History in 5. Today I'm going to tell you 5 interesting things about money and power of the Vatican revolving around corruption, murder, scandal, and intrigue. For about 1800 years, the popes were not just the head of the Catholic Church, the spiritual head of the world's largest religion. They were also kings, pope kings. They had a secular empire, thousands of square miles of lands, their own armies. They built up a vast court around the pope. How did they get the money for this? They fueled it by taxing people inside their empire, by fees, and also by selling something called indulgences. A piece of paper was sold to a Catholic and said, you're forgiven for your sins for buying that paper. Still, it wasn't enough money, and the popes had to go at times to borrow money from the Rothchilds, the preeminent banking family in all of Europe who was Jewish, much to the distaste of many Catholic cardinals who thought it was terrible to have to borrow money from the people they viewed as killers of Christ. All of this ended in 1870, when the popes lost their empire. Italian nationalists trying to unify Italy took over, they kicked the king, and they took over the pope's lands. They left the pope with a small postage-stamped size parcel of land, the Vatican, and then all of a sudden in 1929 it changed because the pope struck a deal with the head of Italy, then a fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini. The fascists recognized the Vatican as an independent sovereign country. They made the pope the head of that country, invested with divine rights. 4 years later, that same pope struck a deal with Nazi Germany and Hitler's Third Reich, and they signed a deal where The Third Reich recognized the Church as the Church recognized Hitler and his power inside of Germany. In the middle of the war, the Americans and the British are trying to stop anybody trading with the enemy. So they are blacklisting companies and countries, including some countries that call themselves neutrals, like Switzerland, San Marino, Monaco. The Vatican says we're neutral. Once the bank is formed, the Vatican is able to do business throughout the war, continue to do it with Nazi Germany, with blacklisted companies. After the war, what happens? That Vatican bank funds with British and American intelligence some Nazis to escape to South America who were wanted as war criminals. The bank, the Vatican, and intelligence agencies have become partners by the end of the war. Bishop Marcinkus gets involved with prominent Italian businessmen, including Nicola Sandona, one of the titans of industry in Italy in the 1960s and 70s, and also Roberto Calvi, a major banker. They end up in all types of offshore deals and back-to-back loans and fraudulent transactions that bring down the business empires of those two men and put the Vatican Bank at the edge of bankruptcy. And Marcinkus ends up staying inside the Vatican, claiming that the jurisdiction and sovereignty of the Vatican as a separate nation keeps him from going to trial for fraud in Italy. And eventually that standoff leads to his resignation. He leaves the country without ever serving a day in prison. An Italian journalist exposed the extent to which the Vatican Bank had still stayed a corrupt institution through the 1990s into the 2000s. Enter Pope Francis. He comes in 2013 with high expectations. He fired many of those laymen who worked inside the bank who weren't doing anything to make it transparent. He's adopted rules which suddenly changed the bank to become part of the international community. The wild and crazy days of murders and double dealing and fraud may well be, hopefully, a thing of the past.
This is Audible.
Audible Inc. presents Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion.
Judge and the prosecutor saying, try me or let me go.
Rafael's your boyfriend?
Yes. Rafael Cornejo.
He's Colombian?
No, Nicaraguan. But he's lived in the Bay Area since he was like 2 or something.
It's interesting, I thought, but not the kind of story likely to excite my editors. Some drug dealers don't like being in jail? Oh. What's the connection to the forfeiture story? I asked. Rafael, she explained, had been a very successful businessman, and the government, under the asset forfeiture program, had seized and sold his automobiles, his houses, and his businesses, emptied his bank accounts, and left him without enough money to hire a lawyer. He had a court-appointed lawyer, Corral said, who was getting paid by the hour and didn't seem to care how long the case took.
Rafael had the most gorgeous house out in Lafayette, and the government sold it for next to nothing. Now what happens if he's acquitted? He spends 3 or 4 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit, and when he gets out, someone else is living in his house. I mean, what kind of a country is this? I think it would make a good story.
It might, I told her, if I hadn't done it half a dozen times already. 2 years earlier, I'd written a series for the Mercury called The Forfeiture Racket, about the police in California busting into private homes and taking furniture, televisions, Nintendo games, belt buckles, welfare checks, snow tires, and loose change, under the guise of cracking down on drug traffickers. Many times they'd never file charges, or the charges would be dropped once the victims signed over the loot. The series created such an outcry that the California legislature had abolished the forfeiture program a few weeks later. But I knew what I would hear if I pitched Corral's story to my editors. We've done that already. And that was what I told her. She was not dissuaded.
There's something about Rafael's case that I don't think you would have ever done before, she persisted. One of the government's witnesses is a guy who used to work with the CIA selling drugs. Tons of it.
What now? I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly.
The CIA. He used to work for them or something. He's a Nicaraguan, too. Rafael knows him. He can tell you. He told me the guy had admitted bringing 4 tons of cocaine into the country. 4 tons! And if that's what he's admitted to, you can imagine how much it really was. And now he's back working for the government again.
I put down my pen. She sounded so rational. Where did this CIA stuff come from? In 17 years of investigative reporting, I had ended up doubting the credibility of every person who ever called me with a tip about the CIA. I flashed on Eddie Johnson, a conspiracy theorist who would come bopping into the Kentucky Post's newsroom every so often with amazing tales of intrigue and corruption, Interviewing Eddie was one of the rites of passage at the Post. Someone would invariably send him over to the newest reporter on the staff to see how long it took the rookie to figure out he was spinning his wheels. Suddenly, I remembered who I was talking to. A cocaine dealer's moll. That explained it. Oh, CIA. Well, you're right. I've never done any stories about the CIA. I don't run across them too often here in Sacramento. See, I mostly cover state government.
You probably think I'm crazy, right?
No, I assured her. You know, could be true. Who's to say? And when it comes to the CIA, stranger things have happened. There was a short silence, and I could hear her exhale sharply.
How dare you treat me like I'm an idiot,
she said evenly.
You don't even know me. I work for a law firm. I've copied every single piece of paper that's been filed in Raphael's case, and I can document everything I'm telling you. You can ask Raphael, and he can tell you himself. What's so hard about coming over and at least taking a look at this stuff?
That's a fair question, I allowed. Now, what was my answer? Because I lied and I do think you're crazy? Or because I'm too lazy to get up and chase a story that appears to have a 1 in 1,000 chance of being true? You say you can document this?
Absolutely. I have all the files here at home. You're welcome to look at all of it if you want. And Raphael can tell you...
In the background, a child began yowling.
Oh, Sierra, just a minute, will you? That's my daughter. She just fell down.
The phone thunked on the other end, and I heard footsteps retreating into the distance. Well, that's a promising sign, I thought. Were she a raving dope fiend, they wouldn't let her raise an infant. She came back on, bouncing the sobbing toddler. I asked her where she lived.
Oakland. But Raphael's got a court date in San Francisco coming up in a couple weeks. Why don't I meet you at the courthouse? That way you can sit in on the hearing, and if you're interested, we could get lunch or something and talk.
That cinched it. Now, the worst that could happen was lunch in San Francisco in mid-July, away from the phones and the editors. And who knows, there was an off chance she was telling the truth. Okay, fine, I said. But bring some of those records with you, okay? I can look through them while I'm sitting there in court. She laughed.
You don't trust me, do you? You probably get a lot of calls like this.
Not many like this, I said. Flipping on my computer, I logged into the dialogue database, which contains full-text electronic versions of millions of newspaper and magazine stories, property records, legal filings, you name it. If you've ever been written about or done something significant in court, chances are dialogue will find you. Okay, let's see if Rafael Cornejo even exists. A message flashed on the screen. Your search has retrieved 11 documents. Display? So far, so good. I called up the most recent one, a newspaper story that had appeared a year before in the San Francisco Chronicle. My eyes widened. 4 indicted in prison breakout plot. Pleasanton inmates plan to leave in copter, prosecutors say. I quickly scanned the story. Son of a bitch. 4 inmates were in
the bigger venture, and they even were quoted as saying, oh, this is going to be the safest crypto investment that we could sort of dip our toe into. So they dipped their toe, and unfortunately, what crypto kind of needed was people like JP Morgan to come in, Goldman Sachs, firms like that to say, yeah, you know what, this is the future. I want to do this. And the firms like that, like Ontario, like Temasek, these other guys, they're VCs. They take risks. Temasek, Blackstone, and Ontario, they don't take zeros, right? They make real late-stage investments that are really legitimate. The crypto needed the opposite, needed Blackstones who have $1 trillion of assets. They needed the Goldman Sachses, the JP Morgans to come in and say, you know what, we'll try this out. They're never doing this again, right? Never. It's going to be 10 or 20 years before Blackstone, BlackRock, CPPIB, any of these guys say, yeah, we want to be in crypto. And the problem is that to sustain...
Air is the enemy of freshness.
But all of crypto is a lot bigger than that. It makes LTCM look small. So if this $800 billion that we created out of thin air has no new incremental buyer, right? That's the problem, is that the Blackstones of the world aren't saying, Bitcoin looks cheap, I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. That's not what they're saying. They're saying this paper money thing that you guys tried to sort of like float out there, this computer program money, this database entry money, this is crazy that anybody thought that I'd be interested in this. They're gonna, these are conservative people to begin with. They're not saying like Microsoft went from this price to that price. This is more attractive. Microsoft's cheaper. That's the way a stock investor thinks. This is a crisis of confidence where you can't even think about this as being legitimate anymore if you're
All right, let's talk a bit about Sam Bankman-Fried, because you want to, you know you do. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried did continue to speak out. You want him, he's available now, apparently. This, of course, after the collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange. He sat down with Andrew Ross Sorkin yesterday at the DealBook Summit. Bankman-Fried struck back against those who accuse him of fraud.
I didn't ever try to commit fraud on anyone. I was excited about the prospects of FTX a month ago. I saw it as a thriving, growing business. I was shocked by what happened this month. And, reconstructing it, where there are things I wish I had done differently. There was no person who was chiefly in charge of positional risk of customers on FTX. And that feels pretty embarrassing in retrospect.
Didn't really keep a close eye on that Alameda, apparently, Jim. It was his first interview. Apparently, he may have done another one already today. I would assume his lawyers have just thrown their hands up and said, we're just done with you. But he feels compelled somehow to continue to speak. It's obviously a fascinating story for many, regardless of whether they have any involvement in the crypto world at all. It's still been fascinating to watch and listen to, and obviously kudos to Andrew.
It was a fabulous interview by Andrew. Now, there's a couple things. Now, having gone to Harvard Law School, but and became a member of the bar, I will say this: that guy is a clueless idiot. Intent means nothing. Saying sorry means nothing. If you commingle, if you had no record keeping, those are against the law. It's not like they're like, you know what, I was sloppy and I feel bad and I'm sorry. No, you were sloppy, you didn't keep records. Illegal, all right? So if you're admitting to illegality, even though you think that you had no intent, the U.S. Attorney does not care one whit about intent. What the U.S. Attorney cares about is, did you break the law? Like, you don't go to the U.S. Attorney and say, man, I'm really sorry.
I didn't mean it.
I didn't even hurt anybody. No, it's against the law. Now, being a nice guy, which he clearly is irrelevant.
Many people that I've spoken to, met him and known him, describe him that way. It doesn't mean a thing.
It means absolutely nothing.
No.
Some of the nicest people I know have spent some serious time in jail.
And he does seem genuinely sorry. But again, there are many out there who believe he's just a pathological liar.
Well, I'm that. He's
are.
a pathological liar. He's a con man. He admits to commingling two accounts that shouldn't be commingled, but then he says it doesn't really matter and I feel badly. Well, you know what? Again, it doesn't matter if he's a pathological liar or the most honest man in America. The fact is he broke the law. And I understand why his lawyers don't want to talk, because a lot of times what the lawyers say is, if you admit and you do not seek Fifth Amendment protection, we can't help you. You will probably go to jail. See, lawyers say, it's perhaps better that you don't say that you did the crime. Yeah. That tends to be why lawyers are lawyers.
Well, it's an important point you make. Again, his saying, I didn't knowingly commingle funds doesn't mean a thing.
It really, that law is so... Look, I was in a hedge fund.
Not an effective defense.
If you commingle funds, your lawyers, and I had good lawyers, said, okay, you'll probably go to jail for that. Don't commingle. So I would say, but I didn't have any intent to commingle, which I did not commingle.
For now.
Wow.
I think he's still hanging at the Albany Club, although I don't know how he's paying those monthly dues. But
is he in Baker's Bay?
No, he's at the Albany Club.
No, but have you looked at some of these Baker's Bay?
What about Baker's Bay? That's not
this stuff.
What about it? I'm sorry.
But we should just take up golf and go to these places.
They're very expensive, Jim.
Literally 24 hours after Bernie admitted to his son that he, had perpetrated a big fraud, he was in handcuffs. And he was my neighbor here in North Carolina for a number of years before he passed, in prison. So look, the fact that SBF is on a press tour and not in a jail cell is incomprehensible.
As if the SBF FTX saga couldn't get any weirder, Sam Bankman-Fried is now doing a media tour, with major outlets giving him a platform to explain what happened with FTX. This is a stark difference between that of disgraced investor Bernie Madoff, who was in handcuffs just 24 hours after his Ponzi scheme was exposed. Across his media tour, Bankman-Fried continued revealing some eye-opening revelations, most notably stating that as far as Alameda research is concerned, he wasn't running Alameda, and that he didn't know exactly what was going on. At this point, it's extremely difficult to believe anything Bankman-Fried says, as he openly said on Twitter that he basically told everyone what they wanted to hear and his altruistic persona wasn't real. None of this adds up, and Mark Yusko called it out. In an interview with Kitco News, Yusko questions everything that is going on with SBF and FTX, and because of his media treatment, he believes there is something bigger going on than Sam Bankman-Fried. Let's listen to what Mark has to say.
Look, again, supposition, no direct evidence, but supposition that, look, we're in the third phase of what I'll call the 4 phases of digital asset adoption. So it's the famous Gandhi quote, right? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And, from 2009 to 15, when digital assets were created and Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin and then other assets followed, they ignore you, right? It was like a bunch of nerds and geeks playing with their magic internet money, whatever. Then they laugh at you. So 2016 to 21, a bunch of nerds and geeks playing with their magic internet money. Oh, look, one of these nerds and geeks actually named the Miami Stadium. Okay, big deal. 2022, we entered the then they fight you phase. And it started in May, right, with the Luna debacle. And literally the morning after the Luna crash, Janet Yellen was on television saying, in prepared remarks, we need regulation of stablecoins. That was prepared, right? So something didn't fit, that she was so prepared in real time to make that statement. So then you have a number of intimations about regulation, and at the end of the day, well, and it actually can go back even further to the attacks on the lenders, Celsius, BlockFi, Voyager, not the FTX rescues, but the attacks by the states and the SEC. And look, regulation has been used against disruptors for centuries, right? It's not, in New York City, there was something called the red flag law, right? When the horse and buggy was transitioning to the horseless carriage, the horse and buggy manufacturers bribed the town council to pass a law that said, if you had an automobile, you had to hire someone to walk in front with a red flag. That's where the term red flag comes from. You don't see anyone in New York City walking in front of cars with a red flag anymore because it was stupid. And we don't see many horse and buggies except in Central Park. So it didn't work. And so regulation is a tool used by incumbents. And what does blockchain technology do? It replaces trust with truth. Well, who are the arbiters of trust today? Financial institutions, third-party middle people, $7 trillion industry. Okay, they would like to not be disrupted by DeFi and digital assets. So it's possible that some group of incumbents might have tried to lobby for regulation to delay, obfuscate, change the course of the disruption, perhaps. So that's what it's possible. Look, it's probably not a surprise that a kid, and I say a kid because he's younger than my son, a kid who really had no experience in lobbying, no experience in politics, no experience in running an exchange or a trading organization, no real work experience to speak of, a couple of years, suddenly becomes an expert in trust law and exchange operations and arbitrage trading, and becomes the largest donor to Joe Biden's election campaign, second largest donor last year to the Democratic Party. It's not shocking that his mother runs one of the largest PACs, secretive PACs, that the Silicon Valley elite use to kind of get around campaign finance laws. That's not surprising to anybody, perhaps. Is it a surprise that his father went to Yale?
This call for, net zero is
The crypto sector is still reeling from aftershocks following the collapse of FTX, one of the largest crypto exchanges, which filed for bankruptcy on November 11th. Now, the collapse has left an estimated 1 million creditors facing losses totaling billions of dollars. And this chaos will clear the way for regulators to now march in with ferocity and indignation. And as the FTX saga continues to unfold, we're receiving increasingly bizarre and contradictory information about the exchange, its sister company, trading firm Alameda Research, and its CEO and founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF.
The whole thing, as I understand it, I think, was just one big Ponzi scheme, right? FTX, that was a real business.
Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of the now bankrupt FTX crypto exchange, has been repeating for weeks that he was unaware that FTX was commingling user funds.
Carolyn Ellison says you knew that FTX funds were being funneled to Alameda. Did you know that?
I knew that there is an open margin position there and that involved.
I know, but that's not what I'm asking. If she's in court and you're in court and she's under oath and you're under oath and you're asked, did you know that these funds were being funneled to Alameda, what is your answer?
I did not know that there is any improper use of customer funds.
He was unaware that FTX customer funds were being stolen, despite FTX's own terms of service. All of that user money is now gone, to be clear.
Okay, next please. Go on, Stanley.
I got a $100 check from my grandma.
Well, that's fantastic. A really smart decision, young man. And it's gone.
What's all gone?
The money in your account. It didn't do too well. It's gone.
What do you mean? I have $100.
Not anymore, you don't. Poof.
FTX users have little hope of ever getting their crypto back. Yet, the CEO of the company, SBF, has seemingly been on a press tour making sure that you know that just like FTX users, he's also looking for the one responsible for the FTX fraud and the FTX collapse. To refresh your memory, provide you with the full story, and give you context for the clips I'm about to show you, this is SBF at the New York Times Dealbook Summit with CNBC host Andrew Sorkin. Sam is asked the direct question, and he answers at the end. It appears FTX was...
You think about calling for a ride? Nah. What's the worst that could happen?
Plugged into how much accounts as belonging to FTX trading. So how is it possible that Alameda had this loan of such a large size?
So there's that piece from the terms of service, but there were a number of other parts of the terms of service and a number of other parts of the platform on top of that. There is the borrow lending facility, where users were lending billions of dollars of assets to each other, collateralized by assets on the exchange. You had obviously futures contracts where there are leveraged positions on. Now, of course, all of this, it's meant to be the case that these are positions where FTX could, if it needed to, margin call those positions and close them down in time such that it would cover all of those, all those shorts, all those liabilities. Obviously, that wasn't the case here, and that's a massive failure of oversight, of risk management, and of diffusion of responsibility from myself running FTX.
But just make this very straight. Was there commingling of funds? That's what it appears like. It appears like there's been a genuine commingling of the funds that are of FTX customers that were not supposed to be commingled with your separate firm.
I didn't knowingly commingle funds.
Well, it appears Sam Bankman-Fried has been doing so many interviews lately in so many spaces and putting himself on record to free questions so much. Just yesterday, he might have finally admitted to commingling funds and user fraud. By the way, it seems Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda, FTX's sister company, she's been talking as well.
I think like every week or so, something like weirder than the previous week would happen. For me, a lot of it was just about sort of, readjusting my expectations and being open to whatever happened.
Please watch this video if you haven't already. I'll link this below. It seems like Carolyn Ellison has been talking to the FBI and telling her story. Anyways, SBF finally admitting to fraud? Let me show you and you tell me. Great journalism by CoffeeZilla. Sam Bankman-Fried just yesterday was asked by CoffeeZilla in Spaces, if it's true that you didn't invest FTX user assets, not even in the treasuries, why do those FTX user assets no longer exist?
If it's true that you didn't invest client assets, not even in treasuries, as you said via a now deleted tweet, why do those client assets no longer exist?
I'm just taking a stab at this because I don't have the data, but my best guess is the following, is that there were a lot of those assets remaining. We processed something like, $5 or $6 billion, I think, of withdrawals over the few days prior to, or I guess the few days, during the crash. And there are still a few $1 billion of those remaining, I think, in the estate. And so you put those together, you have many billions of dollars of those assets. But I think, and so that's part of the answer, is that there were a large number of actual assets there. I think there's one follow-up question you probably still have there, which is, well, how about people who didn't withdraw and were also in that bucket? And part of the answer is, well, there still do exist some number of billions of dollars of assets.
So Sam Bankman-Fried claims many FTX users were able to withdraw their assets, and those who didn't withdraw still have their assets as part of FTX? This is where it gets interesting. Again, good job to CoffeeZilla. I've been following this guy for a long time. This is one of the ways I stay up to date on everything crypto. Anyways, CoffeeZilla then asks Sam if Sam can guarantee that FTX user assets are backed one-to-one. Sam hesitates and then starts to talk about a news story. Listen to the end of this clip. Sam Bankman-Fried admits FTX user money was fungible. They paid out everybody from seemingly the same fungible wallets. I can't believe he admitted to commingling like this.
No, is there one-to-one assets? Because that's the whole thing. We're talking about a separation of funds. So those funds should be in a different place, in a different wallet than everybody else. What you talked about servicing billions of dollars of withdrawals has nothing to do with those specific digital assets, because that's just first come, first serve, whoever pulled out first. We're talking about people who never agreed to have their funds loaned out, who never agreed to have their funds put on margin. They should have, according to your terms of service, one-to-one backing. It should all still be in some bucket somewhere. And are you confident today, as the CEO of FTX, this has nothing to do with Alameda, are you confident today to say that those are absolutely real and they exist and they're present, people are backed one-to-one on client digital assets?
So I think, and again, I'm just taking a stab here, but I think what happened is that if you look at especially a lot of the withdrawals that happened, those withdrawals were not necessarily only coming from people who never used margin trading or futures or staking or anything else. Those weren't just withdrawals from people who were keeping one-to-one backed or were sort of just keeping them as pure spot balances. And it was omnibus wallets between the various categories. And so I think that the answer to your question is that a number of those assets were withdrawn by people who had balances on the exchange, potentially in the few days prior to the collapse. If you wanted to think about it this way, it could be that, that happened. And then, when
when the collapse sort of completed, that effectively meant that there was, if you wanted to put it this way, like fungibility created during those withdrawals between assets for people who had and had not been using.
So did you hear what SBF just admitted? FTX user money was fungible. That means that there was not a separation of funds. If there is fungibility between two different FTX buckets of money, that means that there are no separate buckets. There's just one bucket, meaning FTX users who didn't agree to lend their money to Alameda or lend their money to margin traders were forced to take on that risk anyways. Doesn't SBF see that as defrauding FTX customers? Listen to what he says.
I can take the money that someone who didn't sign up to those same risky terms didn't agree to. Isn't that fraud?
So I'm specifically talking about what happened in the days immediately during and following the crash, in that 3 or so day period. And during that period, I think we may have allowed just generalized withdrawals. I think that was if you're saying that we should have held up withdrawals for everyone who had an open futures position, for clawback potential or something like that. I don't know, maybe that would have been the right thing to do. I hear where you're coming from on that. I felt, at the time that, we wanted to treat customers equally. It was an incredible...
But they had agreed...
There's something alien.
...to different things, so you can't treat them equally.
And now that Sam admitted that they were commingling funds for the withdrawals, he starts getting a little bit defensive. SBF accuses CoffeeZilla of grandstanding, monopolizing the time. Just listen to the clip. Why do you think he acts like this?
I mean, it's like, this is the whole problem of the story of FTX and Alameda, is all the funds were being commingled. Isn't this just another story of commingling funds, except this is now FTX, which you can't pass the blame to Alameda anymore. This is your company, your funds, that you are treating all the clients the same when they clearly signed up to different terms of service.
So I just want to respond to that. And please, I completely respect your question, but you have monopolized all of these discussions, CoffeeZilla. You need to let others speak, and you need to respond to what I'm saying and not grandstand as much here. I completely understand where you're coming from. But to answer your question, I didn't make a decision there. We processed withdrawals as we normally do until it became clear we couldn't anymore, at which point we shut them off. And it was the case that, at that point, there was a big liquidity hole. That's what happened. If you want to judge that process and think that we should have been spending those days frantically trying to code up a new withdrawal process, I disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from.
Okay, but it's not about coding up a new withdrawal process, Sam. It's about treating FTX clients the way you told them they'd be treated. So that's even worse. If this is how FTX always processed withdrawals, then the FTX terms of service have been a lie from the very beginning. The withdrawals weren't segregated as promised. They literally were in a huge pot of money, first come, first serve. SBF conned everyone? In addition, SBF just can't keep his story straight, it seems, because in another Spaces last night, SBF admitted that when customers were buying and selling and trading Bitcoin on FTX, they weren't actually buying or trading real Bitcoin. It was just a fake entry into their account at FTX. Any media besides Altcoin Daily want to cover this?
Because that makes sense as to why there were no more Bitcoin to withdraw, where customers like that I know had Bitcoin balances, because those Bitcoin actually didn't exist, because it was just notional. You were just letting us buy notional tokens that didn't actually really exist.
Yeah, or another way of phrasing that.
Because otherwise you would have had to have the USDC somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I believe that what you're saying is, in fact, part of what happened.
By the way, if you're planning to attend Bitcoin Conference 2023, let's hang out. It's going to be epic. Use code AltcoinDaily, 10% off.
You know I cannot get enough about Scamboy Freed, Sam Bankman-Fried, guys, Legal Bro. Hey, what's up, guys? Legal Bro here. You know I cannot get enough about Scamboy Freed, Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX's former CEO. In the headlines all over the place. Today we're going to watch a video, finally, Somebody willing to interview Sammy Boy that does not hold back the punches.
He hated it so much that he left within minutes, in part because he didn't know he would be interviewed by me. He thought he was being interviewed by someone else on Twitter. And I snuck up in the DMs and got on the call and started peppering him with some harder questions. And within minutes of that, suddenly Mr. Open and Honest decided he needed to leave.
Now remember, the big question in this case, did Sammy know that FTX was sending consumer funds to Alabama?
Should have torpedoed his political career instead of giving it a major boost.
Well,
George H.W. Bush would have been in jail.
Well, wait, that was when the United States decided that trafficking cocaine was a good way to get your foreign policy paid for.
Yeah, I mean, just...
traffic the cocaine. Here's the best part, is they traffic the cocaine to Americans. How about that? Not only did they bring it, they sold it to America. So they caused this huge drug problem that they then had to solve. So problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah, the crack academic, I mean, I don't got much time for the brothers usually, but the whole the CIA is behind the crack epidemic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hand this over to the black nationalists as well, because I mean we know our issues that the blacks have. We're well aware of that, but they're not wrong. When you look at how black radicalism in the 60s and 70s was completely neutered by their drug epidemics.
Well, look at heroin in the 70s. Where did that all come from?
Vietnam.
Really weird how every country would get involved with war and coups, and we suddenly get a.
Where's all heroin coming from now?
Oh yeah, well. First, see, what we had to do is we had to the heroin. We don't know where the heroin came from. We were too busy watching moon landings. Okay, don't forget.
Their keepers try to thwart the escape, prosecutors contend. Rafael Cornejo, 39, of Lafayette, an alleged cocaine kingpin with reputed ties to Nicaraguan drug traffickers and Panamanian money launderers, was among those indicted for conspiracy to escape. The story called Cornejo a long-time drug dealer who was convicted in 1977 of cocaine trafficking in Panama. He has also served time in a U.S. prison for tax evasion. He owns several homes and commercial properties in the Bay Area. This sure sounds like the same guy, I thought. I scrolled down to the next hit, the San Francisco Examiner story. The four men were charged with planning to use C4 plastic explosives to blow out a prison window and with making a 9-inch shank that could be used to cut a guard's guts out if he tried to block their run to the prison yard. Once in the yard, they allegedly would be picked up by a helicopter and flown to a Panamanian cargo ship in the Pacific, federal officials said. The remaining stories described Cornejo's arrest and indictment in 1992, the result of an 18-month FBI investigation. Suspected drug kingpin, head of a large cocaine distribution ring on the West Coast. Allegedly involved in a major cocaine pipeline that ran from Cali, Colombia to several West Coast cities, importing millions of dollars worth of cocaine via San Diego and Los Angeles to the Bay Area. That's some boyfriend she's got there, I mused. The newspaper stories made him sound like Al Capone, and he wants to sit down and have a chat. That'll be the day. When I pushed open the doors to the vast courtroom in the San Francisco Federal Courthouse a few weeks later, I found a scene from Miami Vice. To my left, a dark-suited army of federal agents and prosecutors huddled around a long, polished wooden table, looking grim and talking in low voices. On the right, an array of long-haired, expensively attired defense attorneys were whispering to a group of long-haired, angry-looking Hispanics, their clients. The judge had not yet arrived. I had no idea what Corral Baca looked like, so I scanned the faces in the courtroom, trying to pick out a woman who could be a drug kingpin's girlfriend. She found me first. "You must be Gary," said a voice behind me. I turned, and for an instant all I saw was cleavage and jewelry. She looked to be in her mid-20s. Dark hair, bright red lipstick, long legs, short skirt, dressed to accentuate her positive attributes. I could barely speak. "You're Corral?" She tossed her hair and smiled. "Pleased to meet you." She stuck out a hand with a giant diamond on it, and I shook it weakly. We sat down in the row of seats behind the prosecutor's table, and I glanced at her again. That boyfriend of hers must be going nuts. "How did you know it was me?" I asked. "I was looking for someone who looked like a reporter. I saw you with a notebook in your back pocket and figured..." "That obvious, is it?" I pulled out the notepad and got out a pen. "Why don't you fill me in on who's here?" She pointed out Rafael, a short, handsome Latino with a strong jaw and long, wavy hair parted in the middle. He swiveled in his chair, looked right at us, and seemed perturbed. Corral waved, and he whirled back around without acknowledging her. He doesn't look very happy, I observed.
He doesn't like seeing me with other men.
Why was he trying to break out of jail? I asked.
He wasn't. He was getting ready to make bail, and they didn't want to let him out, so they trumped up these phony escape charges. Now, because he's under indictment for escape, he isn't eligible for bail anymore.
The escape charges were, in fact, the product of an unsubstantiated accusation by a fellow inmate, a convicted swindler. They were later thrown out of court on grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, and Cornejo's prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Hall, was referred to the Justice Department for investigation by Federal Judge Sandra Brown Armstrong. In a San Francisco Daily Recorder story about the misconduct charge, it was noted that it is not the first time that Hall has been under such scrutiny. While serving with the Department of Justice in Texas, the Office of Professional Responsibility reviewed Hall after an informant accused Hall of approving drug smuggling into the U.S. Hall said the office found no merit in the charge. Corral pointed out Hall, a large blond man with broad features. Who are the rest of those people? I asked.
The two men standing over there are the FBI agents on the case. The woman is Hall's boss, Teresa Canepa. She's the bitch who's got it in for Raphael.
As Corral was pointing everyone out, the FBI agents whispered to each other and then tapped Hall on the shoulder. All three turned and looked at me. What's with them?
They probably think you're my hitman.
She smiled, and the agents frowned back.
Oh, they just hate me. I called the cops on them once, you know.
I looked at her. You called the cops on the FBI?
Well, they were lurking around outside my house after dark. They could have been rapists or something. How was I supposed to know?
I glanced back over at the federal table and saw that the entire group had now turned to stare. I was certainly making a lot of friends. Can we go out in the hall and talk for a minute? I asked her. We sat on a bench just outside the door. I told her I needed to get case numbers so I could ask for the court files. And by the way, did she bring those documents she'd mentioned? She reached into her briefcase and brought out a stack an inch thick.
I've got 3 banker's boxes full back at home, and you're welcome to see all of it. But this is the stuff I was telling you about concerning the witness.
I flipped through the documents. Most of them were federal law enforcement reports, DEA 6s and FBI 302s, every page bearing big black letters that said, "May not be reproduced, property of U.S. government." At the bottom of the stack was a transcript of some sort. I pulled it out. Grand Jury for the Northern District of California, Grand Jury number 93-5, Grand Jury invoice number 9301035, reporter's transcript of proceedings. Testimony of Oscar Danilo Blandon, February 3rd, 1994. I whistled. Federal grand jury transcripts? I'm impressed. Where did you get these?
The government turned them over under discovery. Dave Hall did. I heard he really got rained out by the DEA when they found out about all the stuff he gave us.
I looked through the transcript and saw parts that had been blacked out. Who did this?
That's how we got it. Raphael's lawyer is asking for a clean copy. As you'll see, they also cut out a bunch of stuff on the DEA 6s. There's a hearing on his motion coming up.
I skimmed the 39-page transcript. Whatever else this Blandon fellow may have been, he was pretty much the way Corral had described him. A big-time trafficker who dealt dope for many years. He started out dealing for the Contras, a right-wing Nicaraguan guerrilla army in Los Angeles. He'd used drug money to buy trucks and supplies. At some point after Ronald Reagan got into power, the CIA had decided his services as a fundraiser were no longer required, and he stayed in the drug business for himself. What made the story so compelling was that he was appearing before the grand jury as a U.S. government witness. He wasn't under investigation. He wasn't trying to beat a rap. He was there as a witness for the prosecution, which meant that the U.S. Justice Department was vouching for him. But who was the grand jury investigating? Every time the testimony led in that direction, words, mostly names, were blacked out. Who is this family they keep asking him about?
Raphael says it's Menezes. Norwin Menezes and his nephews. Have you heard of them?
Nope.
Fairly be described as the official Chapo crypto correspondent. Ben, welcome to the show.
I love it. That's an unpaid position, right?
Of course. Gotta get that
okay, cool.
I mean, well, you will be paid in Chapo tokens.
Yeah, baby. Give me those sweet CPTs. You can mint 10 billion of them. I want at least half. Yeah, man, I'm here. I'm here to talk about all things crypto and how it's stupid. So, has anything been happening? I haven't been following the news. I've been writing a book. I don't know what's happening anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, we pitched this as a big victory lap because of the the lightning quick collapse of FTX and the I don't know, the Wicker Man like scenario going on right now with Sam Bankman-Fried. And I guess I just want to, like, as someone who follows this stuff, I think I'd like to start in like the broadest possible terms. What was FTX? How is it supposed to work? And what led to its spectacular collapse?
Well, fraud seemed to have led to its spectacular collapse, but which is good for me considering that's what I'm writing a book about. But yeah, so FTX was like a big crypto exchange. You know, if you watch sports, it was impossible to ignore them. They had, you know, the rights to the Miami Heat arena, FTX arena, excuse me, for as long as that lasts. They had the Major League umpires uniforms. The first time they've ever given like a patch for the uniforms, which is pretty hilarious. They were like literally buying off the umps, which I thought was cool. They are, you know, so yeah, he's running an exchange. It's run out of the Bahamas. He was also running this thing called Alameda Research, which is not a research firm, of course, it's a trading firm. And the thought was like, well, obviously conflict of interest. You're owning a firm that's trading on your own exchange. That would never be allowed in a regulated marketplace. But everyone assumed Sam was actually like the smart one of the group. Admittedly, somewhat of a dubious prize in crypto, but still, like, he was the guy who, you know, had it all figured out and was probably doing all sorts of shenanigans that he would probably get away with and making a ton of money. And then lo and behold, we figure out, oops, he actually has gambled away, lost all of the money, and not just the money from Alameda that he'd taken from venture capitalists, but regular people's money that had put it on FTX. So
yeah, I thought, like, you know, the infamous podcast appearance when he was on Odd Lots?
Yeah.
Well, with Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway, very good show, where he describes yield farming, and he basically just describes a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And by virtue of that, by virtue of him nakedly knowing that, I was like, oh, maybe he'll be like the JP Morgan in 2009 of this industry, because he appears to know that it's just nothing. That It's like that there's nothing you can do on the blockchain that you can't do better on existing technologies. But yeah, it turns out, like all of these guys, like everyone nowadays, he did not want to actually be making money on the thing he was supposed to be making money on. He thought he was too smart for that and completely ruined everything.
Well, one of the fucking hilarious things about him being called the JP Morgan of crypto is that JP Morgan, you know, so what they're referencing is 1907, and when JP Morgan had to like basically get this group of rich dudes to like bail out all of these banks that were falling apart. Well, Morgan laid bare the fact that you needed a central bank. Like, the failures of the system prior to having a central bank is one of the reasons, like, we created this trusted third party, which crypto is like dead set on like taking away, right? It's trustless. Like, it's just you and me. We're just gonna transact directly, except we're also gonna have to run it through a Bahamas based shell corporation in the, you know, in the Caribbean. Like, it's all just like nonsense, you know? It's like, well, whoever Satoshi was, whatever his he or they were doing, like, what it's become is online poker 2.0.
2022 has not been a great year for real estate investments. The S&P US REIT Index, which tracks publicly traded real estate investment trusts, is down around 23% year to date, which is a lot worse than the S&P 500, which is only down 15% over the same period. But not all REITs are down. Non-traded real estate investment trusts seem to be doing just fine. The Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust is up around 9% year to date as of last month. Look at that, it's the only one that's up. So let's do a little Googling to see what it is that they're doing that's so right. Oh, it seems there's a bit of a problem. There's a headline here. Blackstone limits withdrawals at a $125 billion property fund as investors rush to exit. No, you can't leave. Well, why would people want their money back? Blackstone have managed to buy the only properties that are not down this year, and people want their money back? There's just no satisfying some people. There's even a quote from a Blackstone spokesman in the article. Our business is built on performance, not fund flows, and performance is rock solid. In truth, I'm not sure that up 9% is actually rock solid. Rocks aren't up 9%. I mean, the nature of being rock solid is that you don't move around very much. These Blackstone guys possibly need to hire some of the laid-off crypto marketers. A better line might be, we reached out to Blackstone for comment, and a spokesman replied with an emoji of a rocket and the moon. I mean, that's why people want out. Rock solid? If people wanted rock solid, they could buy a bag of rocks and not have to pay a management fee. Here's a chart from Jeffrey showing how redemptions have risen over the last few months. I'm starting to think that people might not trust these private equity guys. I mean, if you're not going to trust a guy in a polyester fleece vest, who will you trust? Now, a cynical view, which of course I would never take, is that non-traded REITs are exactly the same as publicly traded REITs. They invest in property, but instead of selling shares on the stock market, they raise money directly from wealthy individuals. And these investors can only cash out once in a while through the fund sponsors. So how can this fund...
idea what they took. We may never know. If they took anything.
What are you talking about? Why break in and not steal anything? We're a bank.
Well, to be honest, I don't think there was a break-in. We've been at this all day, and all we have is Mr. Mann's word that something happened alongside what is at best very flimsy evidence of some sort of tampering. Again with this crap. Athena, listen. I don't think your head of security is up to snuff anymore. The missing 2 minutes of security surveillance from the vault could be attributed to a simple power failure on the main grid. There is nothing to suggest anyone made it inside the vault. The deposit boxes have been tampered with, but all of them were empty and unused to begin with. All keys are accounted for. Nothing is logged on the internal security system. Nothing happened here.
The deposit boxes were clearly and files were looked through up here and downstairs. That's indisputable.
That's what you two claim. What I'm seeing is amateurs at work. A botched attempted sleight of hand. My guess, there's something in that Cronkite file of yours that you don't want the world to see. Fabian here came up with a very poor plan to try to locate it before the big review next week. What a load of shit.
Fabian, shut up. Matthew, these are serious allegations. You understand the consequences of making them.
Oh, don't bother fighting me. I quit. I've done questionable things in the past, but I want nothing to do with this. Maybe you'll be able to cover your tracks, maybe not. I'm certainly not going to help you. Here's my data drive. I'll resign tomorrow.
Thanks for being here. There's a lot of economic data out today, but I want to talk about something else first. Again, today we have the misdirection from the futures. The futures pointing to an up market, and as of right now, stocks are down again. Is this just because it's the holiday period that we're seeing this?
You know, a lot of times when I was short at my hedge fund, and I was positioned short, meaning I needed it down, I would create a level of activity beforehand that could drive the futures. It doesn't take much money. Similarly, if I were long and I would want to make things a little bit rosy, I would go in and take a bunch of stocks and make sure that they're higher. And maybe commit $5 million in capital to do it, and I could affect it. What you're seeing now is it probably is bigger market now. Maybe you need $10 million in capital to knock this stuff down, but it's a fun game and it's a lucrative game, and you can move it up and then fade it. That's often creates a very negative feel. So let's say you take a longer term view intraday. And you say, listen, I'm going to boost the futures, and then when the real sellers come in, real market comes in, they're going to knock it down. That's going to create a negative view. That's a strategy very worth doing when you're valued on a day-to-day basis. And I would encourage anyone who's in the hedge fund game to do it because it's legal,
right?
And it is a very quick way to make money and very satisfying.
Okay.
Well, by the way, no one else in the world would ever admit that, but I can care.
That's right, and you can say that here.
I can't. I'm not going to say it on TV.
Well, on a related note, there's so many more hedge funds today than when you were managing your hedge fund. Do you think that does that exacerbate the moves, or does it make it tougher?
Well, you know, the hedge funds are positioned long short, okay, not just long like mutual funds. So it's really vital these next 6 days because of your payday. You've really got to control the market. You can't let it lift. When you get a research in motion, it's really important to use a lot of your firepower to knock that down because it's the fulcrum of the market today. So, I mean, let's say I were short. What I would do is I would hit a lot of guys with RIM. Now, you can't foment. That's a violation of
foment.
Yeah, you can't foment. You can't create yourself an impression that a stock's down. But you do it anyway because the SEC doesn't understand it. So that's the only sense that I would say this is illegal. But a hedge fund that's not up a lot really has to do a lot now to save itself. So this is different from what I was talking about at the beginning where I would be buying the Qs and stuff. This is actually just blatantly illegal. But when you have 6 days and your company may be in doubt because you're down, I think it's really important to foment, if I were one of these guys, foment an impression that research in motion isn't any good because research in motion is the key today. So, you know, you would hit this guy and that guy, and when you would see an offering, when you see a guy who's bidding, you'd wipe out that guy very quickly. And what I used to do was called, if I wanted to go higher, I would take and bid. And if I wanted to go lower, I'd hit an offer. And I could get a stock like RIM for maybe, that might cost me 15, 20 million, Annie, to knock RIM down. But it would be fabulous because it would beleaguer all the moron longs who are also keying on research in motion. So we're seeing today with RIM, we're seeing that. That's, you know, again, when your company's in a survival mode, it's really important to defeat research in motion and get the Pisanis of the world and the people talking about it as if there's something wrong with RIM. Then you would call the Journal and you get the Bozo reporter on research in motion and you would feed that there's a Palm's got a killer it's going to give away. These are all the things you must do on a day like today. And if you're not doing it, maybe you shouldn't be in the game.
Okay.
Is that it? Please go away. I'm hot and you are not.
Is that what I think it is?
Yes. Just make sure the information will be put to good use.
Oh, you can bank on that. Who are you? What's your role in this?
I'm not important. Good luck.
It sounds like Miss Red has quite a scoop on her hands. My guess is this will cause a major market upset, which is sure to bring the director out from her fortified office.
Oh my, this is perfect. Perfect.
The rumor that that both Verizon and AT&T have decided they don't like the phone.
Right.
That's a very easy one to do because it's also you want to spread the rumor that it's not going to be ready for Macworld. And this is very easy because the people who write about Apple want that story. And you can claim that it's credible because you spoke to someone at Apple because Apple isn't in it doesn't.
Right, they're not going to comment. They're not going to say.
So it's really an ideal short. And I would, again, if I were short Apple, I would be working very hard today to get that. And the way you would do that is you pick up the phone, and you call 6 trading desks, and you say, listen, I just got off the phone with my contact at Verizon. And he has already said, listen, we're a Lucky G house. We're a Samsung house. We're a Motorola house. There's no room for Apple. They want too much. We're not going to let them in. We're not going to let them do what they did to music. And, you know, I think that's a very effective way to keep a stock down.
Right.
I might also, by the way, because the stock at 84, 85, with a little bit of capital, you go buy some January 80 puts that makes it look like there's going to be something going on. So maybe you give Morgan an order to buy 1,000 Jan 80 puts. Then you go position limit with you use a firm that doesn't know what the heck it's doing. Maybe you go to UBS for puts. And you just kind of create an image that there's going to be news next week, and that's going to frighten everybody.
Right.
Then they all go out and say large put buyer UBS. Then they call Pisani again. You have to use those guys and say, listen, I see a big buyer of puts, and I'm told that it's SAC. You would do that too. And these are all going on under the market that you don't see.
Right, and nobody else talks about it except
but
you.
What's important when you're in that hedge fund mode is to not do anything remotely truthful. Because the truth is so against your view that it's important to create a new truth to develop a fiction. And the fiction is developed by almost anybody who's down like 2% to up 6% here. You can't take any chances. You can't have the market up any more than it.
not rocket science. Jesus Christ!
Motherfucker.
Yes, what is it? Oh, excuse me, sir. I didn't realize. Yes, sir, I've just seen. Well, It's very unfortunate, of course. We did discover evidence of some sort of break-in this morning. But, well, I'm not sure what's happened. Oh, I assure you that was the plan all along, sir. We were gathering up intelligence for just that sort of report, sir. Perez is on the floor interviewing people. Dan is looking through all the files. I don't know how... It's a mystery, sir. I mean, someone must have planned this. The break-in. It's too much of a coincidence to have something like this happen following a break-in. Someone's trying to affect the stocks negatively. Oh, absolutely. Very serious. The FBI will get a full report as soon as we can collate it. You can count on it. Very well. I'll call you directly as soon as I know. And please pass on my regards to the rest of the board. That's...
What? Command? Anybody there?
Director Savalas eliminated. Good work, 47.
What the?
Second backup data disk is secured. Just one to go, 47.
It is if you're up 6, because starting Jan 2 you'll have all your money come out. So what would you do if you're in that situation and you feel like you're desperate? Is that you would do these actions?
So you're talking about the mechanics of the market.
Well, the mechanics are much more important than the fundamentals.
Oh, okay, well, but in terms of the fundamentals, you've been writing about how you
Who cares
think
about the fundamentals? Research in Motion just blew out the quarter. Right. But look what people can do. I mean, that's a fabulous thing. The great thing about the market is it has nothing to do with the actual stocks.
Right.
Now, look, over maybe 2 weeks from now, the buyers will come to their senses and realize that everything that they heard was a lie. But then again, Fannie Mae lied about their earnings for $6 billion. So,
right, and Bristol Myers lied.
It's just fiction and fiction and fiction. And I think it's important for people to recognize that the way that the market really works is to have that nexus of hit the brokerage houses with a series of orders that can push it down, then leak it to the press, and then get it on CNBC. That's also very important. And then you have a kind of a vicious cycle down.
Right.
And it's a pretty good game. And it can be played. You pay for a % or two.
Right, and then do you get long before Macworld and the expectation that the iPhone is going to be good? Right, and then you go back, flip to the long
got
side.
to use the other side.
Interesting.
And there's a case where I would say the January 80 puts can be justified because after I've knocked the stock down to 80, I can buy a lot of common. And then you play it right into Macworld where they'll probably introduce the phone and Verizon's going to take it.
Did you happen to see this Instagram video that's been making the rounds recently of a cab driver who asked the guy in the back about what he did?
You have it? Can you run it?
He was a hedge fund manager. It was actually taken a couple of months ago, but it only recently sort of started making the rounds. Have you heard of this guy? He's a UK-based fund manager.
Can we watch it?
Yeah, we can watch it. Name's Michael Platt. Fascinating, particularly when you make some of the statements that he did. But take a look because this has been something that's been sent around a lot recently.
So my name is Michael Platt, and I must admit it's an honor to be in the back of your taxi. In the world of finance, I'm the highest earning person in the world in finance.
You're the highest what?
Earning person in the world in finance.
Wow.
In the world.
So explain that to me.
So I'm a hedge fund manager, and I've transformed my fund into a personal investment vehicle because we made such high returns.
Wow.
And now it's on the internet on Forbes.
There you have it.
This was paid for by Elizabeth Warren. Now that guy, who is obviously a Britisher, clearly has a humility problem. But that's the kind of thing that Elizabeth Warren's sitting there trying to find the top 10 people who might rival him.
in the
That
United
is the
States.
most
Well,
that man had hubris.
He claims it was a joke, but it didn't feel that way.
It didn't feel that way.
No, it didn't feel that way.
Yeah,
But what he was doing in the back of a car that wasn't his own, being driven by his own driver, I don't know. If you're the man who made the most money in finance.
Does it reflect poorly on Mark Zuckerberg?
Why?
Because that's what the New York Times would say. Everything reflects poorly on Mark Zuckerberg. Everything. Sacha Baron Cohen.
You bring up Sacha Baron Cohen a lot.
Well, because I found that speech chilling. That's the aid.
By the way, we should point out that Facebook.
Fascinating story happening on Wall Street. I love this one. Let's put this up there on the screen from the New York Times. He built a $10 billion investment firm. It fell apart in days. I can't pronounce this one. I think it's Arghegos Capital Management. Bill Wang is his name. So looking into Bill's investment strategy, this is absolutely fascinating. So he was sitting on $20 billion in shares of Viacom, which made him the media company's single largest shareholders. Now, as a result of his total exposure and debt packages and all of this, it fell apart literally within days, which caused the stock of Viacom, which is a real company with real real stuff like assets that actually make money, to go in half in a single week. So this prompted an entire SEC investigation. They're looking into what exactly is happening here. But I actually just think it goes to show how complete house of cards so many of these financial firms, who are supposedly the greatest geniuses in our economy, really are. What it is a complex series of layering debt and borrowing from all of the biggest titans on Wall Street, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, all these people that give them a whole bunch of money. And then what happens is just one or two things go south, and they're leveraged so far up to their neck that they have to start selling, margin call, like all of that, and it can just evaporate. Gone. $10 billion.
And this was like a family firm. This was like a family, their assets, rich people. And what was really wild about that, there's a few layers here. So first of all, like you were saying, the kind of like house of cards domino effect of this one firm goes under due to the Viacom CBS share price dropping a little bit, margin calls, and all these big banks take massive hits. So there's that. There's the unnecessary complexity of all of this, because Viacom, they didn't even realize.
They didn't know.
They didn't know that this was their largest institutional investor by far. And so the other piece of this is, once again, it exposes kind of, okay, so you've got the overwhelming complexity here because they were holding these shares through a bunch of like complicated financial instruments. So it was not clear cut at all, which is part of why these banks got caught up in this, because they also didn't realize how much exposure there was here. And these are investment professionals who you would think would be able to untangle all this stuff, but it was so opaque that no one was able to really untangle it until it was too late. But the other piece of this is how fake it all is. Nothing significant changed at Viacom CBS.
No.
Like, it is still the same company.
Exactly.
There's no like underlying value change here. The sequence of events was they went to raise another round of financing. The people who were involved in raising that money expected Huang to come in as one of the major players in that round of financing. He didn't come in. They closed the round of financing at less than what they expected to raise. And that triggered this whole series of people freaking trying to sell and whatever, decrease the stock price enough so that then Huang had to start selling to make his margin calls and be able to cover. And that decreased the stock price even further so that it dropped, like you said, by 50%. That's all a little bit complex. But the bottom line is, again, nothing really changed at Viacom CBS in terms of the fundamentals of this company and their prospects, whether you think they're good or bad, and I have honestly no idea whether they're good or bad. Nothing fundamentally changed, but because you have this whole incredibly complex house of cards situation, the share price drops by half.
Yeah, and this
Over
is,
nothing.
This is financialization and globalization run amok, which is that you have this guy who has a $10 billion fund, and then he's got he borrows a bunch of money in order to buy Viacom stock, which is worth $20 billion. And now what happens is that because the stock is mostly held by borrowed money, if it goes down, then he has to pay back all of his loans. So at the exact same time that all of that is happening, a quote Chinese e-cigarette company apparently begins to lose its position, and is called RLX, and another one called GSX. And then he borrows a bunch of money in order to buy Viacom stock, which is worth $20 billion. And now what happens is that because the stock is mostly held by borrowed money, if it goes down, then he has to pay back all of his loans. So at the exact same time that all of that is happening, a quote Chinese e-cigarette company apparently begins to lose its position, and is called RLX, and another one called GSX spiral in the Asian markets. So then he has to pull back from this deal, which basically causes the CBS Viacom thing to short on terms of the price, which causes all these margin calls to come in, and it just goes through. And again, the core point of this segment is nothing happened at Viacom. So this is a real company with real assets that generates billions of dollars in cash with real employees who hold this stock as probably mortgage the value of their home and more on the basis of it, and it just evaporates, gone. Hundreds of billions of dollars just in the matter of a second. And it just shows the fragility of our financial system, of globalization, of financialization. And it's always very useful whenever these things happen because it shows that it can all just vanish in an entire instant. And most of the richest people in the world, they operate this way. Their wealth is just as precarious. It's all built on lies and debt, and it's all fakery in terms of paper money. But the problem is that we borrow and leverage real things like factories and people's jobs and people's pensions and their homes against the values of fake assets, and it causes just huge blowups. This is the world we live in now.
It's all so fake, and you really see it clearly during a time like this when nothing fundamentally changes at Viacom CBS and there's wild shifts in the stock price. But then when it's, GameStop and Reddit, suddenly then it's like the fundamentals and how can you not respect the fundamental value of the market, et cetera, et cetera. Huang and others like him made huge profits when the going was good, but he was so over-leveraged that when the tides turned and things started going south, it all fell apart, and there was tremendous risk throughout the entire financial system.
It's a great story, at least. It's a good story.
Very revealing story. All right. More eyes.
Talk to us about this, James. What happened with Arghegos?
Yeah, so I was talking to some people who are in the finance world, and this is something that some people didn't even hear about, but was a major story in the world of investments and finance and Wall Street as of last week. 2 weeks ago is when this really started to come down. But one of the biggest private wealth management firms in the world went tits up 2 weeks ago, or lost 50% of their value, and is expected to have to fold. But dude, this thing blew up in people's faces, and Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, a lot of these prime lenders, they got pretty fucked on this. I think the total toll on this is somewhere over $20 billion that these banks took an L on as a result of what happened with this private management firm called Arghegos Capital Management. It was run by a guy named Bill Huang. Chinese Communist Party. No, not a Chinese Communist Party guy. Although maybe worth tuning in to Steve Bannon War Room, see if there's that link to this. But no. Guy Bill Huang, he is a disciple of a guy named Julian Robertson, who is known as they had an office called Tiger Asia. They were doing investments, novel investment instruments in Southeast Asia 20 years ago or so, until that firm folded and they were run out of Asia at that time. So fitting. I mean, this guy, they run out these Goyish investors just in time to a few decades later open the doors to BlackRock, open the doors to Israeli and Jewish firms in China. So kind of how things are going over there in the Orient. But Bill Huang, 57 years old, he was managing a $10 billion portfolio through his private investment firm, Arghegos Capital Management. They were borrowing billions of dollars from Wall Street banks, including Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and Deutsche Bank.
Of course.
Meaning these banks were the primes, right? They actually processed the trades. They lent the cash and securities to the Arghegos Capital Management firm. They used this borrowed capital to build really substantial positions in only a handful of American and Chinese stocks. They were involved in Baidu, which is a Chinese communications company, but their biggest holding was in CBS, Viacom CBS, of course, the property of the Redstone Rothstein family. By mid-March, this is, 3 weeks ago, Wang was the financial force behind $20 billion in shares of Viacom CBS, making him the media company's single largest institutional shareholder. But get this, nobody outside of the banking world knew this because of the way these deals were structured and because of the arrangement between him and these prime lenders. They had ownership stakes of Discovery and Viacom over 10%. These guys own 10% of both Discovery Media and Viacom. But it was never disclosed because they didn't have to disclose it, since the shares were held mostly through complex instruments called derivatives created by the banks. So on paper, the shares were owned by these banks, but in reality, they were owned by or managed by Arghegos Capital Management. So they were managing $10 billion or somewhere in that area, but in reality, they had $30 billion worth of exposure because they were doing shorts, they held margin positions, and yeah, this is a case study in leverage right here, as we'll get into. So all this was going well in 2020 as the stock market is booming, Viacom's share price is way up, but then the price of stocks Arghegos controlled started to fall. Creditors issued a margin call, which forced Arghegos to liquidate its positions, which resulted in one of the largest investment firm collapses since 2008, if not the largest. And I think with the total losses now being closer to final tabulation, this is the biggest investment firm collapse in over a decade. And it's blowing up in these people's faces.
Yeah, I see this picture of Bill Huang here on a stage with Ravi Zacharias at a conference in Adventura, Florida. He's there with evangelical leader Ravi Zacharias. But yeah, dude, Wang is rocking the black skinny jeans that I guess he's preparing for a flood in sneakers, and then the sport coat. I mean, he just looks like the typical like retard who is trying to be hip and cool.
He looks like an Asian Bannon, sort of.
He does. The hair, yes, especially. The hair, especially. He looks like a Steve Bannon. So how did all this start? I mean, it sounds like they borrowed a lot of money from all these banks that lend to Jignat figures indiscriminately. He seems to be tied in with, I guess this Ravi Zacharias is dead now. I didn't know that. But yeah, I guess he's tied in with evangelicals and Christian ministry finances. And I mean, this has got a real big sort of Trump platform stink to it, doesn't it? It's all the same, sort of tied in to the same group of people. I guess Huang had a come to Jesus moment about, I guess, did he have a spiritual awakening as a result
He
of
did.
this?
Well, he had one after being investigated for insider trading.
Right.
To the tune of $44 million, I believe, was the toll there. That was several years ago. But here's how this started. Here's how Arghegos came about. It's a firm he founded. It's called a family firm. This is one of those firms that is private wealth management. They don't have to make the same disclosures that an actual bank does. But Arghegos, their primary assets were Chinese and American tech stocks. Over the course of the last year, like many other institutional investors, they did very well. Viacom CBS, for example, was worth $12 a year ago and was as high as $100 on March 22nd, 2 days before this thing imploded. Wang kept amassing his stake in these companies through these complex positions arranged with the banks called swaps, which gave him the economic exposure and the returns, but not the actual ownership of the stock. That's why his shares wouldn't show up on disclosures, for example. Baidu is another one of their big holdings. Again, Chinese company. Went from $97 a year ago to $339 this February. So these guys were making a killing. And if they had been content to simply make this money and sell in limited quantities or trade options, they could have been okay. But that's not what they did. Bloomberg reported last week that Arghegos started with $200 million of assets in 2013 when the firm was founded and peaked at $20 billion a couple weeks ago, adding that much of that wealth increase happened during the past 12 to 24 months alone. So even including the crash of March 2020 with the pandemic. But the problem is they weren't content to simply make their money. They wanted more. They continued to leverage themselves. Bloomberg, in one of the articles about this, explains it pretty succinctly. The thing about margin lending is that you borrow money to buy stocks, and your stocks go up. You automatically deleverage. If you use $15 of your own money, for example, and borrow $85 from your broker to buy $100 of stock, you have 85% leverage because you owe that $85. If the stock goes to $200, you're down to 42.5% leverage. You still owe your broker the $85, but with $200 worth of stock. If the stock falls to $150, that's fine. You're still in the black and your broker still has security for its loan. But the thing about Bill Wang is they did not see these leverage numbers going down and think, okay, this is good. We're in a healthier position. We can weather a margin call, for example. They continued to leverage themselves. They made continuously enormous bets, which made him very wealthy over the course of 2020. But they plowed every cent of that into increasing those leverage bets. So while they were making returns between 40 and 80%, according to sources close to the firm, Bill Wang had said he didn't take the profits out. He had never taken profits from these stocks that had soared. Quote, "No, I'm still buying," said Mr. Wang, according to a person familiar with the matter. By mid-March, as Viacom was up to $100, Wang was the single largest institutional investor in Viacom CBS, with a position valued at $20 billion. Now, that sounds great, but of course, this is all built on debt, and their position was founded on borrowed money. So if the stock price goes down, for example, there was an unexpected reversal, they would have to pay the banks back to cover the losses or be wiped out. And this is the kind of thing that, again, we're seeing the rules being very different for you, the layperson, compared to these institutional investors, whether they're Jewish or not, is the thing in many cases. Of course, Jews get special treatment, as we'll talk about later. But yeah, think about how the Republicans were talking about people experiencing financial hardship during COVID. Like, well, you didn't budget correctly. Well, Dave Ramsey, for example. We never did this story on the show, but Dave Ramsey saying if the stimulus check makes a substantial difference in your life, you're more screwed than you have bigger problems than COVID. But these guys are doing this to the tune not of $1,000 at a time, not of getting in a little bit of credit card debt. These guys are 100% leveraged in some cases on these positions. And this is just the way of the road in this industry. It's really remarkable.
Well, and it also sets an example, too, from the Christian angle, because it's telling these people to take big risks. Because if Bill Hwang has faith in God, then surely he must have faith in the markets. And therefore, I will do what he does and take big risks. And people have been taking very big risks, thinking that the Trump economy is just going to keep on going and that it's going to keep on pumping. And yeah, it's up to Dow 34,000. But what if you're just a participant in a giant pump and dump? I mean, how are you going to know when to get out? And if you're blinded by this sort of faith in these prophetic sort of figures, you're not going to know when to get out. In fact, you're going to be completely blinded by it. Even Mr. Hwang himself was completely blinded by it. And it just shows you what a huge handicap this is.
Yeah, and that gets into what he actually did with this money too, because he did live a comfortable lifestyle, but he put a lot of this money into these evangelical Christian organizations. So he was a billionaire, obviously. He had a large boat that he worked on, but compared to others on Wall Street in his class of investor, he actually lived relatively modestly. His house was only $3 million, but he drove an older car. Things like this. He wasn't doing the Jordan Belfort routine, for example. But in 2010, there were some regulatory problems he ran into regarding insider trading. Mr. Wang said these regulatory issues revived his Christian faith. I had really a bad business problem, and I knew no matter how much money and connections I had, they couldn't help me, Mr. Wang said in 2018 at a Christian conference. Mr. Wang returned clients' money in 2012 and turned his firm into a private family office. Private family offices, for those in real Rhinelander, are private wealth management advisory firms that serve ultra-high net worth investors,
just
private
like
clients only.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, similar to Epstein, except it seems like Bill Wang actually had clients other than Les Wexner.
The journalist wrote an article about his interactions with Jeffrey Epstein. And in it, he said Mr. Epstein knew an astonishing number of rich, famous, and powerful people and had photos to prove it. He also claimed to know a great deal about these people, some of it potentially damaging or embarrassing, including details about their supposed sexual proclivities and recreational drug use. So Jeffrey Epstein his arrogance is coming out at this point, and he's even telling a journalist off the record that he's about blackmail. And this is from another New York Times article. Federal authorities seized hundreds, possibly thousands of sexually suggestive photographs of girls who appear underage, as well as hand-labeled compact discs with titles like Girls, Pics, Nude, and with the names redacted, and Young, name redacted, plus name redacted. So these DVDs possibly contain blackmail footage of Jeffrey Epstein, given what this article is saying. But yet, federal authority, and they certainly have a lot of images of child pornography, but yet we haven't heard anything about that investigation, and don't know whether any of these girls that were on these pornographic films were approached by law enforcement. This is an article from the Evening Standard. This article was published on January 22nd, 2001. This is way before Jeffrey Epstein became infamous. And this is a quote from the article. He has a license to carry a concealed weapon, once claimed to have worked for the CIA, although now he denies it. And this is another excerpt from the article. He has the spook connections and pulls the strings worldwide. So this author is definitely thinks that Jeffrey Epstein is working for intelligence. And then another excerpt from the article: Epstein has joined Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell on 5 of their breaks together in the past 12 months, to Mar-a-Lago, Phuket, Florida, and Windsor, and has also welcomed Prince Andrew to stay at his $30 million New York townhouse at least twice last year. So Randy has distanced himself from Jeffrey Epstein, but there's just, they had so much contact. They obviously had a friendship. Prince Andrew can run, but he can't hide. So this is from the Daily Beast on July 7th, 2019. Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida that ultimately signed off on Jeffrey Epstein's sweetheart deal in 2008, where he spent 13 months in a county jail for molesting a number of, although he wasn't charged, he was charged with 1 count of molestation, but the Department of Justice knew of 32 victims. And Alexander Acosta was actually, after he served as U.S. attorney and participated in covering up Jeffrey Epstein's enterprise and gave him, signed off on the non-prosecution agreement. He was bumped up to be Donald Trump's labor secretary, and actually he became Donald Trump's labor secretary after hiding after this egregious cover-up. So this is kind of interesting. When Acosta was transitioning to labor secretary, he was asked about the sweetheart deal that he gave Epstein. And he reportedly responded he had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. So yet we have another example of Jeffrey Epstein belonging possibly to an organization that's an intelligence organization. So Jeffrey Epstein, protected pedophile and blackmail artist. Jeffrey Epstein purportedly molested Annie Farmer in 1996. The Farmer sisters reported Epstein to the FBI in 1996 and were stonewalled. So the federal authorities, Jeffrey Epstein actually came to the federal authorities in 1996, and they just ignored the Farmer sisters. Had they not ignored the Farmer sisters, think of the scores of women now who were victims then, who wouldn't have been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. So over the course of 30 years, Jeffrey Epstein, I believe, trafficked underage girls for about 30 years. He and his cohorts molested scores and scores of underage girls, some reportedly as young as 11 or 12 with impunity. The mainstream media sticks with 14-year-olds, but there's been examples of women or girls that were molested at 13. Actually, one of the lawsuits that's been settled was, and the girl was had been 13 years old when Jeffrey Epstein molested her. And articles have come out and shown that Jeffrey Epstein, they were younger than, and there's a couple of articles that I'm aware of that said that the youngest victim was 11 or 12 years old. So the Justice Department had a list of 32 Epstein victims, which could have guaranteed Epstein a life sentence. But according to Alexander Acosta, intelligence intervened, and Epstein was given a sweetheart deal culminating in 13 months in county jail. So Alexander Acosta was told to lay off Jeffrey Epstein, that he belonged to intelligence. And what's really interesting here is the people that were behind Jeffrey Epstein were able to engineer his sweetheart deal in 2008. And that same shadowy network was able to allow Jeffrey Epstein to essentially traffic young women for almost 25 years after the Farmer sisters went to the FBI. So Epstein could not have blackmailed power brokers with impunity because such men typically have access to ruffians, murderers, and even organized crime. The only way Epstein could have blackmailed some of the most powerful men in the world and lived to tell the tale was if those power brokers were aware that Epstein had the backing of a very powerful network or organization that would protect him and seek retribution. And this is an important point. Jeffrey Epstein by himself could not have blackmailed some of the most powerful men in the world. There had to be an organization behind him that said to these people who were blackmailed, these men that were blackmailed, don't even think about trying to hurt Jeffrey Epstein or we'll take you down. And I'll give you an example of someone who is unbelievably generous to Jeffrey Epstein, who also has ties to organized crime. So Les Wexner, a blackmail mark. Les Wexner is the CEO of L Brands, which includes Victoria's Secret, Pink, Bath & Body Works, C.O. Bigelow, Abercrombie & Finch, and he has a net worth of $4.5 billion. Now, this is an article from the New York Times on July 27, 2019. It says that Epstein was introduced to Wexner in the mid to late 1980s. And Mr. Epstein started spending more and more time around Wexner, leaving longtime colleagues puzzled about why.
It's just stupid hot down here today. Do not turn on the AC. It might be a little warm in here, but those exhaust fumes are just horrible.
I know.
Who the hell decides to put an AC unit in a basement garage?
Someone who doesn't work here anymore, I hope.
My dad came by the bank last week. Lives out of town, but drove in to see where I work.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I gave him a tour and everything. Afterward, we went to...
Mr. Bodyguard, hey!
Talking to you, sir. Hey! Last warning, asshole! Damn it. Yeah, I gave him a tour and everything. Afterward, we went to this little diner over on 5th, and he told me the strangest thing. Though he's a Freemason, been a member of a local lodge since I was a little kid. And he told me that Milton Fitzpatrick serves more Masonic members than any other bank in the U.S.
Is that right? It sounds like a coincidence. I mean, it's a big investment bank with just shy of like 1,000 branches, including this one.
I told him that, but he kept on. Said it was rumored that the bank was actually being run by some super secret group. You know, like the Illuminati or something. And he was sure that Athena Savalas was a part of that group.
The director. She's a dead fish, man. I mean, she wouldn't be caught socializing with anyone, especially not some secretive group of people running the world from the shadows, you know? I think your dad is getting a little too much into that whole Freemason thing.
Yeah, it does seem pretty far-fetched.
There was a recent one. People are saying that his son did it.
Yeah. My mother always believed that, but again,
That's a weird conspiracy theory, though, right? Isn't
That's
that a weird
one I don't
one?
really get into.
Yeah.
I don't want. Yeah, those are the ones that are out there. I don't really get into that. I don't go near the moon. I don't go near. I'm not an OJ truther.
Are you a Gulf of Tonkin guy or Operation Northwoods?
Those are all true.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Those are all true.
Operation Northwoods is my favorite.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
They talked about bombing a ship.
Yeah.
With people on it.
They were going to blow up a drone jetliner and blame it on the Cubans.
Yeah.
They were going to attack Guantanamo Bay, arm Cuban friendlies, and have them attack Guantanamo Bay.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that was not that long ago.
I know. That's why we need you back.
God, I can't do it.
Well, you know what? I got mad.
Conspiracies are too fucking. It's too exhausting.
I got exhausting because I would do a show and then somebody would come up to me after the show and they'd be like, they'd show me a pizza menu. I swear to God, and they go, "You see that?" And I go, "No, well, what is it?" They go, "That's the NAMBLA symbol." And I'm like, it says garlic knots. And they're like, you got. No, they're like, you got to really look at it.
Oh,
and I'm like, all right, I can't go the rest of my life with that.
Well, they look for it in everything. Everything's a conspiracy. And then when it comes back to you and they say, "Oh, Tim is involved in this,"
right?
Like, and then you go, "Oh, I see how this works." People just make shit up,
yeah,
and then they believe it.
Yeah, the CIA is now getting involved in podcasting.
Yes,
with you guys. You're their first show, but they're going to get a few others on.
They're deeply involved in stand-up.
They've started a
sort of
network.
like the Russian trolls. That's what they're
Deeply
doing.
involved. I love the idea of the CIA going and watching sets and be like, who's getting passed at the store?
Oh, you don't know. I have a friend of mine who thinks that the CIA started Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix.
There's a book about that called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, written by a guy named Dave McGowan.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you right now, Joe, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to tell you, it's kind of interesting. There was a lot of cult shit going on in Laurel Canyon.
I'm sure. Probably about pussy.
There was a lot of weird shit going on. The CIA, the Rand Corp was all over there. There was a lot of shit happening.
Well, I'm sure there was a lot of shit happening, but there is not a fucking intelligence agency in the world that can create a Jimi Hendrix.
No, of course. And they're not
You know?
sitting there. That book was like that they were managing the birds.
Yeah.
The CIA was like, they were like, no, it's Mr. Tambourine. It was like a CIA guy going to be like, it's Tambourine Man. Yeah. Play a song for me.
Imagine being in that time in the country when everything was just falling apart left and right around us. Vietnam War, Kent State, just fucking Nixon's the president.
Yeah.
It's just chaos left and right. There's
Yeah.
no internet.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing drugs. It must have been wild.
It must have been amazing.
I mean, I always think about that Hunter S. Thompson quote about, like we talked about the 60s and that in the 70s, it was almost like the wave crested and then just pulled
It's crashed
back.
from Fear and Loathing in Las
Yes,
Vegas.
yeah.
But I'm a big, I'm a Kennedy guy. I think there's something really shady with that.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
For sure.
And in that book, there's some amazing stuff about
Now,
that.
this book that you gave me is Family of Secrets.
It's a guy, Russ Baker, who's a legit journalist, and it's been praised by like Dan Rather and Bill
trying
Moyers.
to drag me in, bro.
I'm trying to get you in. Let me tell you right now, this will get you in. It'll
doubt
get you in.
I don't have that kind of time for
George H. Did you know that George H.W. Bush called the FBI and said that he thought he knew who the killer of JFK was? Did you know that?
No. He
didn't
called
know?
them?
He called the FBI in Houston.
Hey,
and he said,
what's up? It's George.
George Bush. I'm in Tyler, Texas, and I think I know who the killer is. And he informs on this guy, James Parrott, and James Parrott ended up being like one of his staffers. It was this weird cover story he kind of planted, and that came out in a memo. And there was another memo. These are declassified FBI memos, Freedom of Information Act. There was another memo that said after the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover briefed George Bush of the CIA. The problem was George Bush should not have been working for the CIA at that point. He should have been just a private citizen. So it suggested he was working for the agency for a very long time. And he was made the director of the agency for 1 year after the family jewels came out, which was this whole thing where the CIA went to Congress and they admitted that they had done all these things from, coups and fomenting revolutions in countries. And they made him the director for 1 year after that happened to make a clean break from all of the nefarious activities that the agency had been involved with. But if you take that memo to mean that he had an existing relationship with them, he was actually just becoming because it made no sense to anyone. They were like, why is this guy that everyone called a lightweight becoming the head of the CIA after the CIA just admitted to all these horrible things?
They called him a lightweight?
Yeah, he was like, I think Kissinger had said to Nixon, like, he's a lightweight. They made him ambassador to China. He was never a guy that had serious political capital, and he was made the head of the CIA. And then after that memo was unearthed, people were saying, this was an extension of the cover-up. He was being made the director at this very interesting time in history because he actually had worked with the agency forever, and he was not at all a lightweight. He was a serious operator, and he was going in there to kind of clean up and transition them into a new era. I'm telling you.
I'm already out.
You're
I'm already
out?
done. Yeah.
How are you out?
I can't listen to that.
It's good. It's great, though.
I need current shit.
I know, but this
I need
is what
some like Julian Assange. I need something right. I need some Edward Snowden.
I know the Bushes are done. All right,
I can't do the Bush anymore.
I'll get an Assange
it's not
book.
enough.
I'll get an Assange book.
I can't get in there.
Listen,
I'll
I'm telling you,
in the Clintons.
I'll
dabble in the Clintons.
If you read a chapter of this, If you read a chapter of this,
you give me a cookie.
I don't have a cookie, and if I do, I'm taking it. But you'll be. It's very interesting, and it's a well-written book because it's not reckless and sloppy.
I'll read the first chapter. I promise.
Thank you.
I will. Yeah. Listen, a buddy of mine gave me David Lifton's Best Evidence on the Kennedy assassination.
Okay.
And that got me into conspiracy theories. This is like 92.
And I get it. You're at the end of the road now where you're like, this is...
Done,
because a lot
tired.
of people are full of shit in that world.
A lot.
A lot of them. And that's what people don't realize.
Well, then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and more preposterous. Have you ever Googled hashtag spaces fake?
Welcome back to Red Ice Radio. Wonderful to have you back with us. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Henrik Palmgren, and you are listening to Internet Talk Radio recorded from the west coast of Sweden. Our website is redicecreations.com, where you can find more information about our radio program, follow along in our frequently updated news, and get access to our member section. As you might have noticed, we've taken a few days off for some filming abroad, but we're back in full force, and we are going to kick things off with our guest Russ Baker. He is the author of Family of Secrets, the Bush Dynasty, the powerful forces that put it in the White House and what their influences mean for America. So this is going to be all about the Bush family dynasty, as it were. I can also mention that Russ is an award-winning investigative reporter with a track record for making sense of complex and little understood matters. He has written for The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, The Nation, the New York Times, The Washington Post, The Village Voice, and Esquire. And he has also served as a contributing editor to the Columbia Journalism Review. And Baker reviewed a 2005 Deadline Club Award for his exclusive reporting on George W. Bush's military record. That's an interesting note that we might talk a little bit more about later on in the program. There's a few websites for you to take a look at here to follow along in during our program. Familyofsecrets.com. It's the main website for the book. And Russ is also the founder of whowhatwhy.com. That's a non-profit investigative reporting site with a lot of interesting information. We might, if there's time, talk a little bit about that as well here later in the program. So with that, welcome to Red Ice Radio, Russ. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Hendrik.
Thank you again for coming on. We appreciate your time. Tell us a little bit about the book Family of Secrets and why you decided to dig into the Bush family dynasty, Russ.
Well, I began my research about 5 years ago, back when there seemed to be, at that time, a better reason to understand a little bit more about particularly George W. Bush. I had been living abroad, been asked to go and train journalists in investigative reporting in the former Yugoslavia, investigative reporting, I think, being a crucial component of any democratic system. And so I had been there in 2003 at the time of the invasion of Iraq and had been writing about that. As I traveled there and around Europe, people began asking me what was going on in the United States and how to account for this sort of remarkable turn of events, and also wanted to know more about Bush. They wanted to know why Americans had elected him. It became clear to me that I really didn't know my country anymore, and that as a reporter, I almost felt an obligation to get back home and do some more digging myself. And so I returned in early 2004 while Bush was running for re-election. It was becoming increasingly evident that they had essentially prosecuted the war with Iraq under false circumstances, and that there were a lot of secrets to this administration. So I sort of just began in 2004 looking into some things about George W. Bush. One of the things that was interesting to me was that here was a man who had started a purely elective and entirely unnecessary war and was sending thousands, well, not only American troops, but particularly members of the National Guard. These are people who usually serve in their state, and they typically are involved in keeping order domestically and helping in situations like natural disasters. But here he had sent all of these people over to Iraq. A lot of them were being injured or killed, and the Guards people told us that they had been improperly trained. And then there was George Bush himself, and there were stories that he had not finished his National Guard service when he was in there instead of going to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So I was interested in this. I was interested in the challenge with John Kerry and the fact that Kerry was under a scrutiny by the Bush people for his role, even though it was clear Kerry had not only served but had gone to Vietnam and had been in a very dangerous situation. So I began looking at Bush, trying to understand who he was, how he had come to be able to be potentially on the way to re-election despite all these controversies. And the result of that was about 6 months of research, including some articles I did for The Nation magazine, where I established that, in fact, he had not finished his military service, that there were 2 years missing. And I thought this was very, very interesting. How had this man been able to just skip out on 2 years of military service? Why was the media not managing to get to the bottom of it? And what was the story behind that? And so that was my work in 2004. And I found many, many other interesting things that made it clear to me that we didn't know much of anything about George Bush and about his family. And the result of that then was that in early 2005, I began research on a book. My simple question was, how was it that this improbable man had become the most powerful person in the world? And that was the opening point for Family of Secrets.
I want to backtrack just a little bit. You talked about the U.S. involvement and in a way invasion in regards to Yugoslavia, the old country, and the Balkan Wars, as it were. But that was under Clinton, wasn't it?
Right. No, I was talking about the Iraq invasion. I was in the former Yugoslavia working with journalists, but I wasn't conflating the two issues.
Oh, okay, there you go. How about Iraq then, if we talk a little bit about that? What do you think is this has been debated back and forth, of course, what the true reasons was for the invasion of Iraq. What's your take on that today, Russ?
Well, one of the many revelations in Family of Secrets is that I have the answer to that question for the first time ever from the lips of George W. Bush himself. And maybe we can get to that as we move through the sort of Bush family story. I don't want to take it out of sequence, but I do have directly from a man who worked with George W. Bush, who told me what George W. Bush told him about why he invaded Iraq.
Okay, well, let's return to that a little bit later then. Maybe we can begin. I asked you a little bit before we began the program here about in regards to Prescott Bush, the father of George Herbert Walker Bush. Is that where you think the dynasty, so to speak, begins? Is this a stage where they become powerful, or have you tied this more in regards to Bush 41, the 41st president, Russ?
Well, just to contextualize that, I would say this. What I learned in my 5 years of research for Family of Secrets was that the Bush family needs to be understood not so much just as a dynasty, but as a function of the system of power in America. And it turned out, I began to see that the Bushes were basically enablers and facilitators of much more powerful, much more wealthy people and interests than themselves. And in fact, this goes back George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Prescott Bush, Prescott's father, Samuel Bush, even Samuel's father, James Bush, who was a minister to very, very wealthy congregations on the East Coast and in San Francisco, all the way back to the height of the gold rush. So there's a very interesting story there of wealth and power in America.
And who would you say is behind the wealth of Bush? Is it does it go back to the powerful bankers again, or is there another agenda for why someone else wanted to put the Bushes to power? What do you think?
Well, the answer to that, if I may, is a long one. Basically, and let me contextualize that, because I think what's important here is for your listeners to understand that I am a classic investigative journalist. I'm not essentially a polemicist. I don't begin anything that I do with a preconceived notion, with a theory or anything. I simply go in with a question, and I'm willing to let the information go wherever it goes.
Right.
I think that's the best kind of journalism to do, the best kind of writing to do. And so because I didn't know the answer to what you're asking me, I want to tell you how I found the answer.
Right. Go ahead.
What I did was I wanted to know, as I said, here was this very improbable individual, George W. Bush, becoming the most powerful person in the world, despite a very severe set of limitations, a lack of qualifications, a lack of experience, a lack of vision, a lack of a lot of the verbal gifts that you would identify with a statesman and a leader. And so I wanted to know how he had come to power. And I began looking at the relationship between him and his father, because it was very clear to me that if his father, who had the same name, George Bush, had not been president of the United States, the son never would have been elected, would have never been elected even governor of Texas or anything for that matter. And so I began trying to understand that. And the first thing I noticed was that as I traveled around the country asking people to explain George W. Bush, they almost never talked about the father. And wherever I read about them, it was always how the father was so different from the son. The father was more careful, more restrained, had a different set of values, much more moderate, and that there had been a kind of a rift, a competitiveness, and a falling out between them. And what I discovered was quite the opposite, that actually George W. Bush had always been very, very close with his father. He'd been a lieutenant to his father. He'd been involved as a key strategist and aide to his father through several decades. And that even though they had a different style, they really shared the deepest values. And I found that, in fact, when George W. Bush had a secret or was hiding something or had a problem, that I would see the mark of his father's hand behind this, but in a very, very secretive way. And so I was fascinated by this gap between the perception of their relationship and the reality I was finding. And this forced me to look more closely at the father, George H.W. Bush, or as I refer to him in the book, I call him Poppy Bush usually because that was his family nickname, and I called the son W, and I'll do that on this program. It's easier for listeners than to keep repeating George and George. So what I discovered was this. Poppy Bush himself had an improbable rise. He really was not a particularly skilled public politician. He didn't really have a lot of gifts or experience in any key areas, but he was just this relentless survivor and climber. And later on we can talk about what I discovered about his relationship with Richard Nixon that fostered his rise. But in any case, prior to that, I go all the way back and I see that the father, Poppy Bush, he'd been the CIA director, as you may know, in 1976. And of course, this is known by the public, but what they don't realize is that he had a secret life. And this secret life was something I discovered in the course of doing the research for Family of Secrets. One of the things that struck me in looking back at the father's history, and the grandfather for that matter I can talk about, was that, first of all, the grandfather, it turns out that when he was in the U.S. Senate, one of the things that he did was he was involved in overseeing the covert activities of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder why a banker would be doing that. And what I learned was that Prescott Bush, his investment banking firm, Brown Brothers Harriman, was an enormously powerful outfit where partners had influence with American presidents of both parties for much of the 20th century. I also found that Prescott Bush's, one of his partners, Robert Lovett, was essentially the father of the CIA, that he wrote the blueprint for the creation of the CIA when it was created in 1947. And I thought this was very, very interesting. Then I see Prescott Bush involved to the extent where, as I describe in Family of Secrets, he actually goes to Hong Kong in the 1950s to find out what went wrong with a covert operation that was intended to assassinate the Chinese leader Zhou Enlai through the poisoning of his rice bowl at a banquet. And I thought, well, this is interesting. He's not just an investment banker. He and his partner is the guy who founded the CIA. There's something else going on here. Yeah. So I became very interested in the whole family. I then began looking at George H.W. Bush, or Poppy, and I was interested. Of course, the story is that he was, after World War II, he set out on his own in the oil business, built up a company, and then ran for Congress, got elected to that, and then became UN ambassador and so on. Well, what I found was very interesting to me was that I obtained a declassified memo that shows that in 1953, when Poppy Bush set up a company called Zapata Offshore, a drilling company that was quite tiny, had very few employees, had just a handful of drilling rigs that they would basically lease out to oil companies, that he was traveling all over the world to places where there was no drilling going on, there was no probability of drilling going on. Just too much travel for a tiny company like that. And I thought, well, that's strange. That's almost like he's really doing something else. Yeah. Then I found a memo from the CIA revealing that when he started his offshore drilling company, he did it with a man named Thomas Devine, who, according to this memo, was a CIA officer who had, quote unquote, retired from the CIA to go into the oil business with Poppy Bush. And I thought this was interesting because Mr. Devine was under 30 years of age, had just recently received extensive training on the taxpayer rolls, and I thought this was highly improbable. And the more I looked at the company, the more it became clear to me that this was not a normal company, and that it was doing something that looked very much, had all the hallmarks of being basically an intelligence operation. And when I saw that they had a rig that they put just right off of Cuba prior to the Bay of Pigs invasion, I said there's definitely something else going on here. Then I discovered that he had stated that he could not remember where he was. This is Poppy Bush, November 22, 1963, the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and that just stunned me.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so it's definitely something different going on here than in regards to Zapata offshore and all this. And but even if we backtrack a little bit further and talk about Prescott Bush again, and wasn't he even he's been accused of dealing with the Nazis? Isn't that right?
Yes. I mean, I find some of the statements on that a bit imprecise. I spent a fair amount of time in the National Archives looking at what documentation exists on that. I mean, I think the issue there is this. There is no question that their investment banking firm was doing extensive business with German interests in the 1920s and 1930s prior to the rise of Hitler, and that when Hitler was on his way up and when he came to power, that they continued to deal with these German financiers who were in fact aiding Hitler's rise, and that they ended up providing a sort of cover for them when it became impossible for these German financiers to get their money out of Germany. And so you see Brown Brothers Harriman creating this sort of front company with Prescott Bush on the board, where they're essentially handling these German investments. There were investigations by the United States Senate with regard to trading with the enemy, and it was pretty clear that the firm was perfectly happy to continue to deal with those interests, despite what was already clear about the events in Germany. So yes, there is certainly an important story there.
So how did Poppy Bush, and I want to ask you a little bit later how he got that name, of course, but how did he ended up as the head of the CIA then, if he kind of came out of nowhere?
Well, what I reveal for the first time ever in Family of Secrets, this is not in any other book, it's not in any other form, is that I, through my research, I came to the conclusion that when he became CIA director in 1976, something that sort of surprised everyone, and you can look back at the old clippings of the New York Times and Washington Post where they say, oh, it's an unusual choice, he has no experience and so on. In fact, he did have experience, and that what I lay out in Family of Secrets is that George H.W. Bush appears to have had prior involvement with intelligence work before he became CIA director in 1976, going all the way back through the 1960s, even the 1950s with this oil company, and even all the way back to the 1940s when he was a young naval pilot involved with aerial surveillance and intelligence activities in World War II. So my sense is that he had some sort of association with the intelligence apparatus for his entire adult life, which really puts him on a kind of a plane with Vladimir Putin, who became the leader of Russia after a lifetime in intelligence services. Except in the case of Putin, we know about it. In the case of Bush, we didn't know about it.
Interesting. And the name Poppy, is that a play in any way in regards to illegal drug trade and heroin, or where's that coming from?
It has to do. They called him Poppy or Little Pop because he had the name George Herbert Walker Bush, and his grandfather was George Herbert Walker, and because he had the similar name, and I believe also there's some suggestion that he may have even somehow resembled him. Some young relatives of his gave him this nickname.
Okay, so
Poppy meaning pop.
Pop. Okay,
Little Pop.
Right, but no, in regards to the drug trade that has been going on.
No. This was a name given by relatives. No.
Okay. Well, that's
when he was a child.
But is that a track that you've been following in regards to drugs and so forth in regards to Afghanistan and the poppy fields, all of that, the whole story in regards to how that has increased since the invasion of Iraq and since this has led to the growth in heroin on the black market, as it were. Have you tracked that at all?
There are loads of things out there on the internet on all kinds of subjects, and invariably the Bushes are connected to them. My book is already so explosive that I think I go far enough on what I'm able to document. I have more than 1,000 footnotes, as you will see as the conversation progresses. It's full of things that really are quite shocking. And I go where I'm able to document something. I did not see any documentation of some of the things to which you're referring that are on the internet. I'm not going to come to any kind of conclusions as to their accuracy or not, except to say that I don't have any information in that regard.
Tonight, new developments in a year-long News Channel 3 investigation.
The Riverside County Sheriff's Department is looking into possible connections between a triple murder in 1981 and a murder-suicide in 2005 that claimed 6 lives. It's a story you will only see right here on News Channel 3, and our own Nathan Baca joins us with the very latest on this investigation.
Tamara, Libby, this is the most chilling email that we've ever seen written by a detective. This murder investigation is so terrifying to experienced investigators. They are fearful for their lives and their families.
When this detective writes he can't look his wife in the eyes and risk his family's lives, you know it's a big case. Nicaraguan arms deals, stolen computer databases, weapons testing on local Cabazon Indian land, and a lawsuit alleging conspiracy from the highest federal officials for the past 30 years. All of these are now being investigated by the Riverside County Cold Case Division. 3 people were murdered execution style in this Rancho Mirage home in July 1981. There were never any arrests. The victims included Cabazon Indian Vice Chairman Fred Alvarez. Family members say he was going to blow the whistle on a business partnership between defense contractor Wackenhut Services and the Cabazon Indians to build machine guns and biological weapons for Central American countries.
News Channel 3 recently obtained an email written by Riverside County Sheriff's detective. We are not revealing their name to protect their identity.
The email states the Cold Case Division reopened the Alvarez triple murder several months ago. Bad things seem to happen to those who get too close to uncovering Cabazon Arms and its dealings with the federal government. 3 Rancho Mirage murders in 1981. A Riverside County District Attorney investigator left the office in the early 1980s after threats on his life. Journalist Danny Casolaro investigated what he called the Octopus and was found dead in his hotel room in 1991. His reporter notes disappeared. The book on the conspiracy he was to name Indio was never finished. And the detective is investigating whether DA investigator David McGowan and his family of 5 were murdered in 2005 after McGowan looked into the case. The detective writes he doesn't want to continue on the case based on the number of people who have met an untimely demise while doing so. But the detective is continuing the case. News Channel 3 learned former computer programmer Michael Ricanasciuto was recently questioned. Documents show a secret government computer spy program named PROMIS was modified on tribal land in India. PROMIS is linked to a major spy scandal that has stretched for years. With all of these national security implications, the detective states he feels like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole, and he no longer has a complete grasp on the real world. The stakes are high, the secrets are growing, and the suspicious deaths remain unanswered. Even the detective desperately asks, am I just another lamb to the slaughter?
The email was leaked to us and confirmed by multiple sources inside the investigation. The detective who wrote the email has not responded to additional requests for information. Sources within the Riverside County Sheriff's Department tells us that there is major pressure for the Cold Case Division to drop this case. Now, if you have missed any part of this 32-part exclusive investigation more than 1 year in the making, log on to our website at kesq.com. On the right-hand side, click on Special Reports, and then inside the DA's office and DHS Police. So we are continuing our investigation. We're going to hope for some more coming up very soon. Now, if you have missed any part of this 32-part exclusive investigation more than 1 year in the making, log on to our website at kesq.com. On the right-hand side, click on Special Reports, and then the icon that says Inside the DA's Office and DHS Police. So we are continuing our investigation. We're going to hope for some more coming up very soon.
Nathan, how is the McGowan family responding to these findings in this investigation?
I've talked to them, and they are certainly puzzled about what has been going on, but they have been in talks with members of the FBI. There are a lot of questions that are being asked at this point, and the FBI has not officially reopened this case, but sources inside are saying that there's a lot of inquiries being made.
Okay, troubling stuff. Thank you very much, Nate.
Deep state.
It's like, how weird. Another case of autoerotic asphyxiation. Why does this keep happening?
I've said that before with respect to Gary Webb. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can kill people, you know, in theory, that are a lot cleaner than, you know, blowing their head off, you know, shooting them twice in the head with a shotgun and saying it was a suicide.
I mean, how come these people just don't
slicing them up.
disappear? I mean, is that too obvious? That's not a suicide or something?
No,
difficult.
I do agree that it's violent deaths like that are because they don't really fear any consequences from what is erroneously referred to as the public.
Right.
Or
understanding the full extent of corruption in the United States government is something even legal scholars struggle with. But in the 1980s and early 90s, Herculean efforts were made in the days before the internet to follow leads and conduct investigative journalism on nefarious activity by agencies such as the CIA, by reporters including Gary Webb and Danny Casolaro. Like Webb, however, Casolaro met an untimely end and was found dead in his hotel room under suspicious circumstances. The work he did on the Octopus, what we would call the deep state today, highlights a web of high-level people involving illegal espionage, money laundering, drugs, and gun running that persist in operating together in America today.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got. The military-industrial complex.
Saying myself in my own argument. History enjoys all of these work
for people who may be in a rental position. Is that right?
Yes.
For people who may be in a rental. Easy to use software for your desktop PC for people who may be in a rental position. Is that right?
Yeah. At the time, because the banksters weren't going, otherwise known as Jews, weren't going to jail. Nobody was being prosecuted, and so people were kind of.
And now, back to Fash the Nation, heard only on the TRS Radio Network.
Hello and welcome back. Hour 2 here on FTN. Big thanks to Moik for filling in there on Hour 1, bringing you all the latest on the Supreme Court and everything else. But kicking off this hour with a story that you found, Jazz, about the phenomenon of people being house rich and cash poor, and what this is going to mean for people who may be in a rental position. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is actually, I can't take credit for this, and we're totally not recording this on a different day than when Mike and I just did the first half. So, you know, you can unleash your autism on trying to figure out like how we did this. But this is we go to great lengths not to be newscucked when we can avoid it. But let's see here. So yeah, no, this is actually from good old friend Chuck Bousman. Good old Chuck gave me this article and some of the accompanying websites with it. But there's an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about millions are house rich but cash poor. Wall Street landlords are ready. Now, this has been a phenomenon that has been going on for a long time. I remember talking to some people that were buying a house, and one of the things that they encountered a lot was a lot of ads for homes that were rent to own. Rent to own was kind of a big thing in the aftermath of the 2008-2009 crisis, because what happened was you had these Wall Street banks and hedge funds and other financial institutions coming through and purchasing up large swaths of homes at rock bottom prices in 2010 and 2011. And then they were renting them back to people because you have the phenomenon of people mailing their keys back to the bank. Remember this? This was kind of a thing that people were doing at that time because the banksters weren't going, otherwise known as Jews, weren't going to jail. Nobody was being prosecuted. And so people were kind of like, well, you're going to take my home and then I'm going to be underwater in this shit and it's your fault. Like, fuck you. Here's the keys. Goodbye. And so, when that happens like that, some of those people ended up becoming homeless, obviously, like truly homeless and in destitute situations. But most of the time, people are going to try to find some place to live. Like, they're not going to pay a $4,000 mortgage for a house that's worth, 50% or 40% of what it was once worth. But they still have the money to pay rent somewhere. And so the shot was to buy up all these properties and resell them. Well, in some cases, resell them for a profit. But one way to make even more profit is to just make these people rent at much higher prices and make those people pay down the mortgage, pay down the Jewish mortgage as that home is rapidly appreciating in value in 2012 and 2013. You can look at any graph and see how that played out for people. I mean, it paid out for Jews, played out for them really well. I mean, if you could afford to snap up a bunch of properties in 2010 and 2011, and sat on them for 5 or 6 years, those things were doubling and tripling in value. If in a moderate economy, moderate market, you can't do that now. Like, there's a huge financial restructuring going on right now, but you can't fucking find a house. And that's part of the problem. So that's the preamble for all of this stuff. So this is a Wall Street Journal article. This is from September 17th, I want to say, September 17th. So even if there isn't, the article goes, even if there isn't a surge in repossessed homes to buy cheaply off the courthouse steps, which led to an emergence of Wall Street landlords during the foreclosure crisis a decade ago, there's likely to be a lot of forced sales and new renters. Quote, a lot of people are house rich but cash poor, said Ivy Zellman, chief executive of real estate consultant Zellman and Associates. Quote, if they had bought in the last 2 or 3 years, even if they bought 5 months ago, they have equity. Having plenty of home equity but reduced means to keep making payments could prompt many to sell while prices are high and exit ownership with a cash cushion, Ms. Zellman said. People behind on their payments aren't being kicked out of their houses yet because of federal and local restrictions on foreclosure enacted during the pandemic. Many with federally guaranteed mortgages have entered forbearance, which allows them to skip payments for up to a year without a penalty to make up later. Some 3.5 million homes, a 7% share, were in forbearance as of September 6th, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. Many more borrowers are behind on their payments, but not in forbearance programs with their lenders. Meanwhile, bidding wars are breaking out for suburban homes hitting the market. So what you have is this perfect storm of Jews wanting these homes to be snapped up from desperate people who are selling them, who aren't selling them because of programs that are allowing them to stay in their home. And so they're trying to come up with a very elaborate scheme of how to get these people out of their homes and into the hands of Jews and pay even higher prices. But look, Goy, you got to get access to that cash that you have in your property. Never mind that this is the most valuable thing that you own, and it might be worth eating fucking generic macaroni and cheese and bologna sandwiches to keep this, and fucking foregoing like all the fucking consumerism and bullshit to hold on to that house. But no, it's like you sit there and you're like, oh, but I want that $200,000. And the problem, and see what they've done is Jews have painted people into a corner, because if you try to go out and get a home equity loan right now, you can't. Most banks are saying, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing cash out refinancing. I don't give a fuck if you have an 800 credit score. I don't give a fuck if you've got like 70% equity in your home. We're not doing it. Banks are just not doing it. And so people have if people are really hard up for cash, this is what they're going to do. So this is the reverse mortgage for Gen Xers and millennials who are lucky enough to have a home.
Yeah. Yeah, and the shift too, and like the backdrop for this is very different than what it was, say, in the 80s or 90s, because, and you'll pick up on this if you read or listen to like old real estate books or talks, and people say that the bank is never interested in owning property. Banks don't want to be in the real estate market. And so this was the prevailing wisdom for a long time. And this is why you would then get people like first-time home buyers having the ability to make these purchases from, out of foreclosure and things like that. But that's changed. And that's what they're mentioning here in this article is it especially changed in 2008 with the recession then. And at that point, the banks decided that they do want to be in the real estate market. They do want to play that game. They do want to be landlords. And they do want to make all of the profits associated with it. And so now, as opposed to 20 or 30 years ago, you have the banks waiting in the wings to snap up the properties, even if you can't find necessarily like another private party buyer that may not be able to get a mortgage. Like you mentioned, it's fairly difficult right now with job uncertainty and things. But the bank credit's always good from the bank to the bank, right? So they can always step in and buy these things up.
Well, and they want to do this too because they want to turn your home into a subscription model too. They don't like the fact that real property becomes a very valuable asset for people, for white working class. This is how you alienate white working class, by the way, doing Jewish tricks and taking people's homes. Like that's the ultimate alienation. But if I tell you, James, that Jews are the ones doing this, I guess we're also alienating the white working class too. So it's a lose-lose all around, I guess. But in all seriousness, though, they don't want, like, they look at the fact that
You are listening to a Jimy Dore Show bonus. Corona Money Talk with Dillon Rattigan. Money and the economy during social upheaval and the COVID-19 pandemic. Episode 7.
Well, we have Dillon Rattigan here with Corona Money Talk. Let's bring him right in. You know him. He's an award-winning reporter, best-selling New York Times author. He's the host of Truth or What is it? I always forget. What is the name of your podcast, Dillon?
Truth or Skepticism.
That's right. Truth or Skepticism with Tom Sosnoff at Tasty Trade. He's here with us right now. The one, the only Dillon Rattigan with Corona Money Talk. Hi, Dillon. How are you?
James, it's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Nice to be talking to you.
So now, when they passed the CARES Act, the first stimulus, the third stimulus bill, the big one, that was the $5 trillion upward transfer of wealth. Immediately after they passed that, without giving a UBI to workers or people, or without giving Medicare for all, health care to people inside of a pandemic, or canceling debt, or canceling rent, or canceling more, without doing any of that, you immediately had predicted that there would be social unrest. And so what I've been telling people, and what we're going to talk about, is the Democrats' lack of response to what's happening right now. That if Nancy Pelosi, instead of releasing another insult tirade at Donald Trump, would draft legislation to give $2,000 to every human being in the country every month and give everybody health care, student loan relief, and free education, you wouldn't see these riots right now. That's my position. What do you think, Dillon?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that we have been on a tragic path that has been recklessly and arrogantly sort of waddled down by the political class. And, when the pandemic came, it was like taking the safety off of a gun instead of putting the safety back on immediately, meaning job preservation, meaning UBI, meaning Medicare for all. There's a larger issue, unfortunately, which just has to do with the structural degradation of humanity as a base condition, really, on the planet and certainly in the society. And I think because there is that sort of psychic degradation that is at the foundation of whether it's the decisions inside of how policies are made, or whether it's in the way the airline treats you when you buy a plane ticket, or whether it's in the way that social services treats a family, or whether, there's so many expressions of that degraded violence in our culture that the extension of that degradation into the pandemic had a level of arrogance, I think, or I don't know. I won't even conjure to try to understand what's inside of it. But anyway, we talked, there's a biological crisis, an economic crisis, a social crisis, a financial crisis, and then ultimately a military crisis. We have obviously a biological crisis. We have obviously an economic crisis. Chairman Powell, who you talked about last week, really has avoided a financial crisis. And for people to understand, the economic crisis is I can't eat, I can't pay my rent, I can't move my car, I can't pay the rent on this small business, I can't pay the rent on this big business. That's an economic crisis. A financial crisis is there's not enough money in the system because there's too many defaults, and now nobody can get any money, even if they're not in default, which is sort of an echo of the economic crisis can provoke a financial crisis. Anyway, that right now is not a risk. It's not a thing. As Powell said, that he can do as much as he wants. And obviously the social crisis has become, and rightly so, has taken center stage in the most tragic path possible, really.
Now, when you said that, when you predicted, very presciently predicted that there would be social crisis, the straw that broke the camel's back was the killing in Minneapolis.
Of course.
But the tinder was the economic devastation that Americans have felt since almost my whole lifetime. So it's certainly since Ronald Reagan, and the lack of a rational response to it from the left. There has been no rational response to our economic devastation of our middle class and working poor. And what they've done is doubled down.
Joe Biden made his political career putting black men in jail.
Right.
And so Kamala Harris.
Right. So now when we have this guy like when we have a guy like Donald Trump, the answer to Donald Trump that the left offers, or the opposition party offers, is another Trump with a nicer demeanor. That's it. And Joe Biden has no ideas how to fix this crisis. He has no ideas how it got here. He has no idea how we got Trump, even though he's directly responsible for Trump. The 8 years he spent in the White House, and of course the time he spent in the Senate writing things like the crime bill and deregulating Wall Street and screwing people in bankruptcies. Joe Biden has set the table for this to happen. And so when you predicted social unrest, I didn't have any idea it would be like this. And I'll just give you one little itty bitty example. Here's a woman walking up to a cop asking her what's going to happen when the curfew kicks in at 8 o'clock. And let's hear his response.
Can I ask you what's going to happen at 8? Sir? What's going to happen is they're going to start beating the fuck out of you.
And I don't know if you heard what he said. She asked him what's going to happen at 8 o'clock, and he said, "What's going to happen is we're going to start beating the fuck out of you."
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that clip a few hours ago. Somebody showed me that. Yeah.
So I don't have to really show you another video, but I will. Here's the video of them actually doing that. Here they go. Now, is that the Taliban in my country? Is that Al Qaeda? Is that Al Qaeda in my country? Is that ISIS? Because I couldn't imagine anybody acting more violently, more perverted in enforcing law in the world. I can't imagine it. It's happening right here. So we've said at this show, since I've started this show, whatever we do to people overseas, we will eventually do to ourselves. And we're doing it right now. So this is, not only did the oligarchs come in and rape the country of our natural resources and take $5 trillion right out of your pocket and give it to the richest 1,000 motherfuckers, but they also didn't give you health care, and they also closed down your business, and they also didn't give you help with your rent or your mortgage or anything. It is an unbelievable ass-kicking that American citizens are taking from this rapacious oligarchy right now. And the police are as bad as anything I've ever seen, from Nazi Germany to what you name it. Where I can't think of a place. The cops are now the Gestapo. They are now the SS, and they are brutalizing America. You know what I don't see video of, Dillon, is I've never seen a video of cops brutalizing looters. It seems like the cops want people to loot so they can go crack the heads of peaceful protesters more. Have you seen a video of them cracking heads of looters? I've only seen police killing, cracking heads, and beating up and brutalizing peaceful protesters.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the distinction you're making, and it's obviously a very clear one. I haven't seen that. I think I've been trying to take a slightly different perspective, I guess, in that, not that there is any untruth or in anything that people are seeing. Obviously, the police forces are, exhibiting and have been exhibiting, murderous violence, both as a culture, as a system, et cetera, et cetera. Also, there are plenty of good cops, right? At the same time, there are these huge and beautiful protests for justice, and there are also maniac assholes who are taking advantage of the situation to rob the Apple store. Now, I think that the bigger issue, for me anyway, this is for me personally, it's easy for me to get drawn into it, whatever the narrative of that primal rage is. But what is apparent to me is that the imperative, remember the Hong Kong protests, whether you like them or not, they had a very specific set of requests. They wanted a thing or a series of things, not just to be in resistance to everything or even something, but sought to secure a specific thing. And when you look at the karmic consequences of the injustice that is at afoot here, obviously on a racial level with the black community in America going back to slavery, obviously on an economic level, really going back to the founding of the country, and the obvious shortcoming, it sounds trite, the shortcoming relative to the idea or the aspiration of the sort of mythology or the mythology of this country.
Hi, you're listening to Unlimited Hangout. I'm your host, Whitney Webb. The so-called Inflation Reduction Act has been getting a lot of media attention lately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, that attention is related to things in that bill that have nothing whatsoever to do with inflation reduction. Instead, there has been a lot of concern about new funding for the IRS or Internal Revenue Service and other changes to the IRS related to the $80 billion the new bill will provide to the agency over a few years. Specifically, there's been a lot of focus on the claim that the IRS will be hiring over 80,000 new employees, some of whom will be allowed to use lethal force. But less focus has been paid to how the IRS, as part of this new bill, will be moving taxes into the digital realm sooner rather than later, propelling Americans deeper into the digital banking world where central bank digital currencies, the subject of episode number 35 of this podcast, are soon set to dominate. In addition to new policies and powers for the IRS, it also appears that the Inflation Reduction Act is actually more like a climate change bill. As I've noted several times over the past year, including on this podcast and elsewhere, there are efforts to make an entirely new economic and financial system that is being ushered in under the guise of climate change, and none of the actual motivations behind those efforts are actually related to planetary or environmental health. It is worth noting that the Inflation Reduction Act, despite its name implying its main purpose is reducing inflation, has instead been heralded as America's first significant climate legislation by outlets like Fortune magazine, among others. And indeed, many of the policies within this bill are clearly aimed at moving the country closer to this new, quote-unquote, green economic system, as it creates a national green bank and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, among other financial entities focused ostensibly on climate. Joining me today to discuss these issues and much more is Catherine Austin Fitz. Catherine is the president of Solari Inc., which publishes the Solari Report. She is also a managing member of Solari Investment Advisory Services. Prior to Solari, she held top positions at the Wall Street investment bank Dillon, Reed & Co., and was also Assistant Secretary of Housing and the Federal Housing Commissioner for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. For longtime followers of independent media, Catherine's name is likely familiar for her investigations with Mark Skidmore into the missing $21 trillion stolen out of U.S. government accounts, as well as her work on exposing FASAB 56, which is the government accounting practice that both enables and obfuscates the mass theft of taxpayer money from U.S. government accounts. In the COVID era, Catherine has also been an important voice in alternative media on matters relating to digital IDs, vaccine passports, and central bank digital currencies, among other things. So thanks so much for joining me today, Catherine. It's great to have you back on Unlimited Hangout.
Thanks. And, Whitney, I just have to mention to your audience that I spent the last week at Lake Constance. I was there to rest and recuperate, see the opera, go to concerts. What I did was I opened up a draft copy of your new book. And instead, I spent the week immersed in organized crime because I couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah, well, you are one of the few people who's read both volumes already, one of the review copies. And so I really am glad that you liked it.
I loved it. I just loved it. Anyway, I told you earlier, I said it's the ultimate begats of American organized crime. So we have a complete history of all the threads that come together in the horror that was Epstein. But anyway, so let's dive in because we're here to talk about the IRS. But I do hope I get to talk to you about Epstein soon because I can't wait for your book to become available.
Well, I'm sure we will talk about it sooner rather than later. That's for sure. But yes, ostensibly we are talking today about the Inflation Reduction Act. But there is a lot to say about Epstein and about the book, and I've been doing a lot of interviews recently trying to discuss, why the book was split into 2 volumes and other things about that, and what it's about, what I hope it will accomplish, and things like that. But thanks a lot for your kind words because I worked really hard on it, which I think people will notice.
You're competing with RFK for most footnotes ever.
Well, that may have been intentional, was not. But I just wanted things to be really thoroughly sourced because you know how